This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Harvester by Gene Stratton-Porter. Read by Cindy Steib. Chapter 19. Part 1. A Vertical Spine. By middle September, the last trace of illness had been removed from the premises, and it was rapidly disappearing from the face and form of the girl. She was showing a beautiful roundness. There was lovely color on her cheeks and lips, and in her dark eyes sparkled a touch of mischief. Rigidly she followed the rules laid down for diet and exercise, and as strength flowed through her body, and no trace of pain tormented her, she began reveling in new and delightful sensations. She loved to pull her boat as she willed, drive over the wood road, study the books, cook the new dishes, rearrange furniture, and go with the Harvester everywhere. But that was greatly the management of the man. He was so afraid that something might happen to undo all the wonders accomplished in the girl, and again whiten her face with pain, that he scarcely allowed her out of his sight. He remained in the cabin, helping when she worked, and then drove with her and a big blanket to the woods, arranged her chair and table, found some attractive subject, and while the wind raveled her hair and flushed her cheeks, her fingers drew designs. At noon they went to the cabin to lunch, and the girl took a nap while the Harvester spread his morning's reaping on the shelves to dry. They returned to the woods until 5 o'clock, then home again, and the girl dressed and prepared supper, while the Harvester spread his stores and fed the stock. Then he put on white clothing for the evening. The girl rested while he washed the dishes, and they explored the lake in the little motorboat, or drove to the city for supplies or to see their friends. "Are you even with your usual work at this time of the year?" she asked as they sat at breakfast. "I am," said the Harvester. "The only things that have been crowded out are the candlesticks. They will have to remain on the shelf until the herbs and roots are all in, and the long winter evenings come. Then I'll use the Luna pattern and finish yours first of all." "What are you going to do today?" "Start on a regular fall campaign. Some of it for the sake of having it, and some because there is good money in it. Will you come?" "Indeed, yes. May I help, or shall I take my drawing along?" "Bring your drawing. Next fall you may help, but as yet you are too close suffering for me to see you do anything that might be even a slight risk. I can't endure it." "Baby," she jeered. "Christen me anything you please," laughed the Harvester. "I'm short on names anyway." He went to harness Betsy, and the girl washed the dishes, straightened the rooms, and collected her drawing material. Then she walked up the hill, wearing a shirt and short skirt of khaki, stout shoes, and a straw hat that shaded her face. She climbed into the wagon, laid the drawing box on the seat, and caught the lines as the Harvester flung them to her. He went swinging ahead, Belshazzar to heel, the girl driving after. The white pigeons circled above, and every day Ajax allowed his curiosity to overcome his temper and followed a little farther. "Whoa, Betsy!" The girl tugged at the lines, but Betsy took the bit between her teeth and plodded after the Harvester. She pulled with all her might, but her strength was not nearly sufficient to stop the stubborn animal. "Whoa, David!" cried the girl. "What is it?" The Harvester turned. "Won't you please wait until I can take off my hat? I love to ride bareheaded through the woods, and Betsy won't stop until you do, no matter how hard I pull." "Betsy, you're no lady," said the Harvester. "Why don't you stop when you're told?" "I shan't waste any more strength on her," said the girl. "Hereafter I shall say, 'Gee, David, haw, David, whoa, David,' and then she will do exactly as you." The Harvester stopped halfway up the hill, and beside a large shaded bed spread the rug, and set up the little table and chair for the girl. "Want a plant to draw?" he asked. "This is very important to us. It has a string of names as long as the princess, but I call it golden seal because the roots are yellow. The chemists ask for hydrastis. That sounds formidable, but it's a cousin of buttercups. The woods of Ohio and Indiana produce the finest that ever grew, but it is so nearly extinct now that the trade can be supplied by cultivation only. I suspect I'm responsible for its disappearance around here. I used to get $1.50 a pound, and most of my clothes and books when a boy I owe to it. Now I get 2 for my finest grade. That accounts for the size of these beds." "It's pretty," said the girl, studying a plant averaging a foot in height. On a slender, round, purplish stem arose one big rough leaf, heavily veined, and having from 5 to 9 lobes. Opposite was a similar leaf, but very small, and a head of scarlet berries resembling a big raspberry in shape. The Harvester shook the black wood soil from the yellow roots and held up the plant. "You won't enjoy the odor," he said. "Well, I like the leaves. I know I can use them some way. They are so unusual. What wonderful color in the roots." "One of its names is Indian paint," explained the Harvester. "Probably it furnished the squaws of these woods with coloring matter. Now let's see what we can get out of it. You draw the plant and I'll dig the roots." For a time the girl bent over her work and the Harvester was busy. Belshazzar ranged the woods chasing chipmunks. The birds came asking questions. When the drawing was completed, other subjects were found at every turn, and the girl talked almost constantly, her face alive with interest. The Mayapple beds lay close, and she drew from them. She learned the uses and prices of the plant, and also made drawings of cohosh, moonseed, and bloodroot. That was so wonderful in its root color, the Harvester filled the little cup with water, and she began to paint. Intensely absorbed, she bent above the big notched silvery leaves and the blood-red roots, testing and trying to match them exactly. Every few minutes the Harvester leaned over her shoulder to see how she was progressing and to offer suggestions. When she finished, she picked up a trailing vine of moonseed. "You have this on the porch," she said. "I think it is lovely. There is no end to the beautiful combinations of leaves, and these are such pretty little grape-like clusters. But if you touch them the slightest, you soil the wonderful surface." "And that makes the fairies very sad," said the Harvester. "They love that vine best of any, because they paint its fruit with the most care. Bloom, the scientists call it. You see it on cultivated plums, grapes, and apples, but never in any such perfection as on moonseed and black haws in the woods. You should be able to design a number of pretty things, from the cohosh leaves and berries too. You scarcely can get a start this fall, but early in the spring you can begin and follow the season. If your work comes out well this winter, I'll send some of it to the big publishing houses, and you can make book and magazine covers and decorations if you would like." "If I would like? How modest! You know perfectly well that if I could make a design that would be accepted and used on a book or magazine, I would almost fly. Oh, do you suppose I could?" "I don't suppose anything about it. I know," said the Harvester. "It is not possible that the public can be any more tired of wild roses, goldenrod, and swallows than the poor art editors who accept them because they can't help themselves. Dangle something fresh and new under their noses and see them snap. The next time I go to Onabasha, I'll get you some popular magazines, and you can compare what is being used with what you see here, and judge for yourself how glad they would be for a change. And potteries, arts and crafts shops, and wallpaper factories, they'd be crazy for the designs I could furnish them. As for money, there's more in it than the herbs, if I only could draw." "I can do that," said the girl. "Trail the vine and give me an idea how to scale it. I'll just make studies now, and this winter I'll conventionalize them and work them into patterns. Won't that be fun?" "That's more than fun, Ruth," said the Harvester solemnly. "That is creation. That touches the provinces of the Almighty. That is taking His unknown wonders and making them into pleasure and benefit for thousands, not to mention filling your face with awe divine and lighting your eyes with interest and ambition. That is life, Ruth. You are beginning to live right now." "I see," said the girl. "I understand. I am." "You get your subjects now. When the harvest is over, I'll show you what I have in my head, and before Christmas the fun will begin." "What next?" "Sketch a sarsaparilla plant and this yam vine. It grows on your veranda too. The rattlebox, you remember? The leaves and seeding arrangements are wonderful. You can do any number of things with them, and all will be new." He called her attention to and brought her samples of ginger leaves, Indian hemp, queen of the meadow, coneflower, burdock, baneberry, and Indian turnip, as he harvested them in turn. When they came to the large beds of orange pleurisy root, the girl cried out with pleasure. "We will take its prosaic features first," said the Harvester. "It is good medicine and worth handling. Forget that. The Bird Woman calls it butterfly flower. That's better. Now try to analyze a single bloom of this gaudy mass, and you will see why there's poetry coming." He knelt beside the girl, separating the blooms and pointing out their marvelous color and construction. She leaned against his shoulder and watched with breathless interest. As his bare head brought its mop of damp, wind-rumpled hair close, she ran her fingers through it, and with her handkerchief wiped his forehead. "Sometimes I almost wish you'd get sick," she said irrelevantly. "In the name of common sense, why?" demanded the Harvester. "Oh, it must be born in the heart of a woman to want to mother something," answered the girl. "I feel sometimes as if I would like to take care of you, as if you were a little fellow. David, I know why your mother fought to make you the man she desired. You must have been charming when small. I can shut my eyes and just see the boy you were, and I should have loved you as she did." "How about the man I am?" inquired the Harvester promptly. "Any leanings toward him yet, Ruth?" "It's getting worser and worser every day and hour," said the girl. "I don't understand it at all. I wouldn't try to live without you. I don't want you to leave my sight. Everything you do is the way I would have it. Nothing you ever say shocks or offends me. I'd love to render you any personal service. I want to take you in my arms and hug you tight 6 times a day as a reward for the kind and lovely things you do for me." A dull red flamed up the neck and over the face of the Harvester. One arm lifted to the chair back, the other dropped across the table so that the girl was almost encircled. "For the love of mercy, Ruth, why haven't I had a hint of this before?" he cried. "You said you'd hate me. You said you'd drop me into the deepest part of the lake if I deceived you. And if I have to tell the truth, why, that is all of it. I think it is nonsense about some wonderful feeling that is going to take possession of your heart when you love any one. I love you so much, I'd gladly suffer to save you pain or sorrow. But there are no thrills. It's just steady, sober common sense that I should love you, and I do. Why can't you be satisfied with what I can give, David?" "Because it's husks and ashes," said the Harvester grimly. "You drive me to desperation, Ruth. I am almost wild for your love, but what you offer me is plain, straight affection, nothing more. There isn't a trace of the feeling that should exist between man and wife in it. Some men might be satisfied to be your husband and be regarded as a father or brother. I am not. The redbird didn't want a sister, Ruth. He was asking for a mate. So am I. That's as plain as I know how to put it. There is some way to awaken you into a living, loving woman, and please God, I'll find it yet. But I'm slow about it. There's no question of that. Never you mind. Don't worry. Some of these days I have faith to believe it will sweep you as the tide sweeps the shore, and then I hope God will be good enough to let me be where you will land in my arms." The girl sat looking at him between narrowed lids. Suddenly she took his head between her hands, drew his face to hers, and deliberately kissed him. Then she drew away and searched his eyes. "There," she challenged. "What is the matter with that?" The Harvester's color slowly faded to a sickly white. "Ruth, you try me almost beyond human endurance," he said. "What's the matter with that?" He arose, stepped back, folded his arms, and stared at her. What's the matter with that?" he repeated. "Never was I so sorely tempted in all my life as I am now to lie to you and say there is nothing, and take you in my arms and try to awaken you to what I mean by love. But suppose I do, and fail? Then comes the agony of slow endurance for me, and the possibility that any day you may meet the man who can arouse in you the feelings I cannot. That would mean my oath broken, and my heart as well, while soon you would dislike me beyond tolerance, even. I dare not risk it. The matter is, that was the loving caress of a 10-year-old girl to a big brother she admired. That's all. Not much, but a mighty big defect when it is offered a strong man as fuel on which to feed consuming passion." "Consuming passion," repeated the girl. "David, you never lie and you never exaggerate. Do you honestly mean that there is something?" "Oh, there is. I can see it. You are really suffering, and if I come to you and try my best to comfort you, you'll only call it baby affection that you don't want. David, what am I going to do?" "You are going to the cabin," said the Harvester, "and cook us a big supper. I am dreadfully hungry. I'll be along presently. Don't worry, Ruth. You are all right. That kiss was lovely. Tell me that you are not angry with me." Her eyes were wet as she smiled at him. "If there is a bigger brute than a man anywhere on the footstool, I should like to meet it," said the Harvester, "and see what it appears like. Go along, honey. I'll be there as soon as I load." He drove to the dry house, washed and spread his reaping on the big trays, fed the stock, dressed in the white clothing, and entered the kitchen. That the girl had been crying was obvious, but he overlooked it, helped with the work, and then they took a boat ride. When they returned, he proposed that she should select her favorite likeness of her mother, and the next time he went to the city he would take it with his and order the enlargements he had planned. To save carrying a lighted lamp into the closet, he brought her little trunk to the living room, where she opened it and hunted the pictures. There were several, and all of them were of a young, elegantly dressed woman of great beauty. The Harvester studied them long. "Who was she, Ruth?" he asked at last. "I don't know, and I have no desire to learn." "Can you explain how the girl here represented came to marry a brother of Henry Jameson?" "Yes. I was past 12 when my father came the last time, and I remember him distinctly. If Uncle Henry were properly clothed, he is not a bad man in appearance, unless he is very angry. He can use proper language if he chooses. My father was the best in him, refined and intensified. He was much taller, very good looking, and he dressed and spoke well. They were born and grew to manhood in the East, and came out here at the same time. Where Uncle Henry is a trickster and a trader in stock, my father went a step higher and tricked and traded in men and women. Mother told me this much once. He saw her somewhere and admired her. He learned who she was, went to her father's law office, and pretended he was representing some great business in the West until he was welcomed as a promising client. He hung around, and when she came in one day, her father was forced to introduce them. The remainder is the same world-old story. A good-looking, glib-tongued man plying every art known to an expert on an innocent girl. Is he dead, Ruth? We thought so. We hoped so. Your mother did not feel that her people might be suffering for her as she was for them? Not after she appealed to them twice and received no reply. Perhaps they tried to find her. Maybe she has a father or mother who is longing for word from her now. Are you very sure you are right in not wanting to know? She never gave me a hint from which I could tell who or what they were. In so gentle a woman as my mother, that only could mean she did not want them to know of her. Neither do I. This is the photograph I prefer. Please use it. I'll put back the trunk in the morning when I can see better, said the Harvester. The girl closed it and soon went to bed. But there was no sleep for the man. He went into the night, and for hours he paced the driveway in racking thought. Then he sat on the step and looked at Belshazzar before him. "Life's growing easier every minute, Belle," said the Harvester. "Here's my dream girl, lovely as the most golden instant of that wonderful dream, offering me, Belle, in my present pass, the lips and the love of my little sister who never was born. And I've hurt Ruth's feelings and sent her to bed with a heartache, trying to make her see that it won't do. It won't, Belle. If I can't have genuine love, I don't want anything. I told her so as plainly as I could find words, and set her crying, and made her unhappy to end a wonderful day. But in some way she has got to learn that propinquity, tolerance, approval, affection even, is not love. I can't take the risk after all these years of waiting for the real thing. If I did, and love never came, I would end, well, I know how I would end, and that would spoil her life. I simply have got to brace up, Belle, and keep on trying. She thinks it is nonsense about thrills and some wonderful feeling that takes possession of you. Lord, Belle, there isn't much nonsense about the thing that rages in my brain, heart, soul, and body. It strikes me as the gravest reality that ever overtook a man. She is growing wonderfully attached to me. Couldn't live without me, Belle. That is what she said. Maybe it would be a scheme to bring Granny here to stay with her and take a few months in some city this winter on those chemical points that trouble me. There is an old saying about absence making the heart grow fonder. Maybe separation is the thing to work the trick. I've tried about everything else I know, but I'm in too much of a hurry. What a fool a man is! A few weeks ago, Belle, I said to myself that if Harmon were away and had no part in her life, I'd be the happiest man alive. Happiest man alive? Belle, take a look at me now. Happy? Well, why shouldn't I be happy? She is here. She is growing in strength and beauty every hour. She cares more for me day by day. From an outside viewpoint, it seems as if I had almost all a man could ask in reason. But when was a strong man in the grip of love ever reasonable? I think the Almighty took a pretty grave responsibility when He made men as He did. If I had been He and understood the forces I was handling, I would have been too big a coward to do it. There is nothing for me, Belle, but to move on doing my level best. And if she doesn't awaken soon, I will try the absent treatment. As sure as you are the most faithful dog a man ever owned, Belle, I'll try the absent treatment." The Harvester arose and entered the cabin, stepping softly, for it was dark in the girl's room and he could not hear a sound there. He turned up the lights in the living room. As he did so, the first thing he saw was the little trunk. He looked at it intently, then picked up a book. Every page he turned, he glanced again at the trunk. At last he laid down the book and sat staring, his brain working rapidly. He ended by carrying the trunk to his own room. He darkened the living room, lighted his own, drew the rain screens, and piece by piece carefully examined the contents. There were the pictures, but the name of the photographer had been removed. There was not a word that would help in identification. He emptied it to the bottom, and as he picked up the last piece, his fingers struck in a peculiar way that did not give the impression of touching a solid surface. He felt over it carefully, and when he examined with a candle, he plainly could see where the cloth lining had been cut and lifted. For a long time he knelt, staring at it. Then he deliberately inserted his knife blade and raised it. The cloth had been glued to a heavy sheet of pasteboard, the exact size of the trunk bottom. Beneath it lay a half-dozen yellow letters, and face down 2 tissue-wrapped photographs. The Harvester examined them first. They were of a man close 40, having a strong, aggressive face, on which pride and dominant willpower were prominently indicated. The other was a reproduction of a dainty and delicate woman, with exquisitely tender and gentle features. Long the Harvester studied them. The names of the photographer and the city were missing. There was nothing except the faces. He could detect traces of the man in the poise of the girl and the carriage of her head, and suggestions of the woman in the refined sweetness of her expression. Each picture represented wealth in dress and taste in pose. Finally he laid them together on the table, picked up one of the letters and read it. Then he read all of them. Before he finished, tears were running down his cheeks, and his resolution was formed. These were the appeals of an adoring mother, crazed with fear for the safety of an only child, who unfortunately had fallen under the influence of a man the mother dreaded and feared because of her knowledge of life and men of his character. They were one long impassioned plea for the daughter not to trust a stranger, not to believe that vows of passion could be true when all else in life was false, not to trust her untried judgment of men and the world against the experience of her parents. But whether the tears that stained those sheets had fallen from the eyes of the suffering mother or the starved and deserted daughter, there was no way for the Harvester to know. One thing was clear. It was not possible for him to rest until he knew if that woman yet lived and bore such suffering. But every trace of address had been torn away, and there was nothing to indicate where or in what circumstances these letters had been written. A long time the Harvester sat in deep thought. Then he returned all the letters save one. This, with the pictures, he made into a packet that he locked in his desk. The trunk he replaced and then went to bed. Early the next morning he drove to Onabasha and posted the parcel. The address it bore was that of the largest detective agency in the country. Then he bought an interesting book, a box of fruit, and hurried back to the girl. He found her on the veranda. Belshazzar stretched close, with one eye shut and the other on his charge, whose cheeks were flushed with lovely color as she bent over her drawing material. The Harvester went to her with a rush, and slipping his fingers under her chin, tilted back her head against him. "Got a kiss for me, honey?" he inquired. "No, sir," answered the girl emphatically. "I gave you a perfectly lovely one yesterday, and you said it was not right. I am going to try just once more, and if you say again that it won't do, I'm going back to Chicago or to my dear Uncle Henry. I haven't decided which." Her lips were smiling, but her eyes were full of tears. "Why, thank you, Ruth. I think that is wonderful," said the Harvester. "I'll risk the next one. In the meantime, excuse me if I give you a demonstration of the real thing, just to furnish you an idea of how it should be." The Harvester delivered the sample and went striding to the marsh. The dazed girl sat staring at her work, trying to realize what had happened, for that was the first time the Harvester had kissed her on the lips, and it was the material expression a strong man gives the woman he loves when his heart is surging at high tide. The girl sat motionless, gazing at her study. In the marsh she knew the Harvester was reaping Queen of the Meadow, and around the high borders, elecampane and burdock. She could hear his voice in snatches of song or cheery whistle. Notes that she divined were intended to keep her from worrying. Intermingled with them came the dog's bark of defiance as he digged for an escaping chipmunk, his note of pleading when he wanted a root cut with the mattock, his cry of discovery when he thought he had found something the Harvester would like, or his yelp of warning when he scented danger. The girl looked down the drive to the lake and across at the hedge. Everywhere she saw glowing color, with intermittent blue sky and green leaves, all of it a complete picture, from which nothing could be spared. She turned slowly and looked toward the marsh, trying to hear the words of the song above the ripple of singing water, and to see the form of the man. Slowly she lifted her handkerchief and pressed it against her lips as she whispered in an awed voice, "My gracious heaven! Is that the kind of kiss he is expecting me to give him? Why, I couldn't, not to save my life." She placed her brushes in water, set the color box on the paper, and went to the kitchen to prepare the noon lunch. As she worked, the soft color deepened in her cheeks, a new light glowed in her eyes, and she hummed over the tune that floated across the marsh. She was very busy when the Harvester came, but he spoke casually of his morning's work, ate heartily, and ordered her to take a nap while he washed roots and filled the trays, and then they went to the woods together for the afternoon. In the evening they came home to the cabin and finished the day's work. As the night was chilly, the Harvester heaped some bark in the living room fireplace and lay on the rug before it, while the girl sat in an easy chair and watched him as he talked. He was telling her about some wonderful combinations he was going to compound for different ailments, and he laughingly asked her if she wanted to be a millionaire's wife and live in a palace. "Of course I could if I wanted to," she suggested. "You could," cried the Harvester. "All that is necessary is to combine a few proper drugs in one great remedy and float it. That is easy. The people will do the remainder." "You talk as if you believe that," marveled the girl. "Want it proven?" challenged the Harvester. "No," she cried in swift alarm. "What do we want with more than we have? What is there necessary to happiness that is not ours now? Maybe it is true that the love of money is the root of all evil. Don't you ever get a lot just to find out? You said the night I came here that you didn't want more than you had, and now I don't. I won't have it. It might bring restlessness and discontent. I've seen it make other people unhappy and separate them. I don't want money. I want work. You make your remedies and offer them to suffering humanity for just a living profit, and I'll keep house and draw designs. I am perfectly happy, free, and unspeakably content. I never dreamed that it was possible for me to be so glad and so filled with the joy of life. There is only one thing on earth I want. If I only could." "Could what, Ruth?" "Could get that kiss right." The Harvester laughed. "Forget it, I tell you," he commanded. "Just so long as you worry and fret, so long I've got to wait. If you quit thinking about it, all unbeknownst to yourself, you'll awake some morning with it on your lips. I can see traces of it growing stronger every day, for soon now it's going to materialize. And then get out of my way, for I'll be a whirling, irresponsible lunatic with the wild joy of it. Oh, I've got faith in that kiss of yours, Ruth. It's on the way. The fates have booked it. There isn't a reason on earth why I should be served so scurvy a trick as to miss it, and I never will believe that I shall." "David," interrupted the girl, "go on talking and don't move a muscle. Just reach over presently and fix the fire or something, and then turn naturally and look at the window beside your door." "Shall miss it," said the Harvester steadily. "That would be too unmerciful. What do you see, Ruth?" "A face. If I am not greatly mistaken, it is my Uncle Henry, and he appears like a perfect fiend. Oh, David, I am afraid." "Be quiet and don't look," said the Harvester. He turned and tossed a piece of bark on the fire. Then he reached for the poker, pushed it down, and stirred the coals. He arose as he worked. "Rise slowly and quietly and go to your room. Stay there until I call you." With the girl out of the way, the Harvester pottered over the fire, and when the flame leaped, he lifted a stick of wood, hesitated as if it were too small, and laying it down, started to bring a larger one. In the dining room he caught a small stick from a wood box, softly stepped from the door, and ran around the house. But he awakened Belshazzar on the kitchen floor, and the dog barked and ran after him. By the time the Harvester reached the corner of his room, the man leaped upon a horse and went racing down the drive. The Harvester flung the stick of wood, but missed the man and hit the horse. The dog sprang past the Harvester and vanished. There was the sound and flash of a revolver and the rattle of the bridge as the horse crossed it. The dog came back unharmed. The Harvester ran to the telephone, called the Onabasha police, and asked them to send a mounted man to meet the intruder before he could reach a crossroad. But they were too slow and missed him. However, the girl was certain she had recognized her uncle and was extremely nervous. But the Harvester only laughed and told her it was a trip made out of curiosity. Her uncle wanted to see if he could learn if she were well and happy, and he finally convinced her that this was the case. although he was not very sanguine himself. For the next 3 days the harvester worked in the woods, and he kept the girl with him every minute. By the end of that time, he really had persuaded himself that it was merely curiosity. End of chapter 19, part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Harvester by Gene Stratton-Porter. Read by Cindy Steib. Chapter 19, Part 2. A Vertical Spine. So through the cooling fall days they worked together. They were very happy. Before her wondering eyes the harvester hung queer branches, burrs, nuts, berries, and trailing vines with curious seed pods. There were masses of brilliant flowers, most of them strange to the girl, many to the great average of humanity. While she sat bending over them, beside her the harvester delved in the black earth of the woods, or the clay and sand of the open hillside, or the muck of the lake shore, and lifted large bagfuls of roots that he later drenched on the floating raft on the lake, and when they had drained, he dried them. Some of them he did not wet, but scraped and wiped clean and dry. Often after she was sleeping, and long before she awoke in the morning, he was at work carrying heaped trays from the evaporator to the storeroom, and tying the roots, leaves, bark, and seeds into packages. While he gathered trillium roots, the girl made drawings of the plant and learned its commercial value. She drew lady's slipper and Solomon's seal and learned their uses and prices, and carefully traced wild ginger leaves while nibbling the aromatic root. It was difficult to keep from protesting when the work carried them around the lake shore and to the pokeberry beds, for the color of these she loved. It required careful explanation as to the value of the roots and seeds as blood purifier, and the argument that in a few more days the frost would level the bed, to induce her to consent to its harvesting. But when the case was properly presented, she put aside her drawing and stained her slender fingers gathering the seeds, and loved the work. The sun was golden on the lake. The birds of the upland were clustering over reeds and rushes for the sake of plentiful seed and convenient water. Many of them sang fitfully. The notes of almost all of them were melodious, and the day was a long, happy dream. There was but little left to gather until ginseng time. For that, the harvester had engaged several boys to help him, for the task of digging the roots, washing and drying them, burying part of the seeds, and preparing the remainder for market seemed endless for one man to attempt. After a full day, the harvester lay before the fire, and his head was so close the girl's knee that her fingers were in reach of his hair. Every time he mended the fire he moved a little, until he could feel the touch of her garments against him. Then he began to plan for the winter, how they would store food for the long cold days, how much fuel would be required, when they would go to the city for their winter clothing, what they would read, and how they would work together at the drawings. "I am almost too anxious to wait longer to get back to my carving," he said. "Who ever would have thought this spring that fall would come and find the birds talking of going, the caterpillars spinning winter quarters, the animals holing up, me getting ready for the cold, and your candlesticks not finished? Winter is when you really need them. Then there is solid cheer in numbers of candles and a roaring wood fire. The furnace is going to be a good thing to keep the floors and the bathroom warm, but an open fire of dry, crackling wood is the only rational source of heat in a home. You must watch for the fairy dances on the back wall, Ruth, and learn to trace goblin faces in the coals. Sometimes there is a panorama of temples and trees, and you will find exquisite color in the smoke. Dry maple makes a lovely lavender, soft and fine as a floating veil, and damp elm makes a blue, and hickory red and yellow. I almost can tell which wood is burning after the bark is gone, by the smoke and flame color. When the little red fire fairies come out and dance on the back wall, it is fun to figure what they are celebrating. By the way, Ruth, I have been a lamb for days. I hope you have observed. But I would sleep a little sounder tonight if you only could give me a hint whether that kiss is coming on at all. He tipped back his head to see her face, and it was glorious in the red firelight. The big eyes never appeared so deep and dark. The tilted head struck her hand, and her fingers ran through his hair. You said to forget it, she reminded him, and then it would come sooner. Which same translated means that it is not here yet. Well, I didn't expect it, so I am not disappointed. But begorry, I do wish it would materialize by Christmas. I think I will work for that. Wouldn't it make a day worthwhile, though? By the way, what do you want for Christmas, Ruth? A doll, she answered. The Harvester laughed. He tipped his head again to see her face, and suddenly grew quiet, for it was very serious. I am quite in earnest, she said. I think the big dolls in the stores are beautiful, and I never owned only a teeny little one. All my life I've wanted a big doll as badly as I ever longed for anything that was not absolutely necessary to keep me alive. In fact, a doll is essential to a happy childhood. The mother instinct is so ingrained in a girl that if she doesn't have dolls to love, even as a baby, she is deprived of a part of her natural rights. It's a pitiful thing to have been the little girl in the picture who stands outside the window and gazes with longing soul at the doll she is anxious to own and can't ever have. Harvester, I was always that little girl. I am quite in earnest. I want a big, beautiful doll more than anything else. As she talked, the girl's fingers were idly threading the Harvester's hair. His head lightly touched her knee, and she shifted her position to afford him a comfortable resting place. With a thrill of delight that shook him, the man laid his head in her lap and looked into the fire, his face glowing as a happy boy's. You shall have the loveliest doll that money can buy, Ruth, he promised. What else do you want? A roasted goose, plum pudding, and all those horrid indigestible things that Christmas stories always tell about, and popcorn balls and candy, and everything I've always wanted and never had, and a long, beautiful day with you. That's all. Ruth, I am so happy I almost wish I could go to heaven right now before anything occurs to spoil this, said the Harvester. The wheels of a car rattled across the bridge. He whirled to his knees and put his arms around the girl. Ruth, he said huskily, I'll wager $1,000 I know what is coming. Hug me tight, quick, and give me the best kiss you can. Any old kind of a one, so you touch my lips with yours before I've got to open that door and let in trouble. The girl threw her arms around his neck, and with the imprint of her lips warm on his, the Harvester crossed the room, and his heart dropped from the heights with a thud. He stepped out, closing the door behind him, and crossing the veranda, passed down the walk. He recognized the car as belonging to a garage in Onabasha, and in it sat two men. One of them spoke. Are you David Langston? Yes, said the Harvester. Did you send a couple of photographs to a New York detective agency a few days ago with inquiries concerning some parties you wanted located? I did, said the Harvester, but I was not expecting any such immediate returns. Your questions touched on a case that long has been in the hands of the agency, and they telegraphed the parties. The following day the people had a letter, giving them the information they required from another source. That is where Uncle Henry showed his fine Spencerian hand, commented the Harvester. It always will be a great satisfaction that I got my fist in first. Is Miss Jameson here? No, said the Harvester. My wife is at home. Her surname was Ruth Jameson, but we have been married since June. Did you wish to speak with Mrs. Langston? I came for that purpose. My name is Kennedy. I am the law partner and the closest friend of the young lady's grandfather. News of her location has prostrated her grandmother so that he could not leave her, and I was sent to bring the young woman. Oh, said the Harvester. "Well, you will have to interview her about that. One word first. She does not know that I sent those pictures and made that inquiry. One other word. She is just recovering from a case of fever, induced by wrong conditions of life before I met her. She is not so strong as she appears. Understand, you are not to be abrupt. Go very gently. Her feelings and health must be guarded with extreme care." The Harvester opened the door, and as she saw the stranger, the girl's eyes widened, and she arose and stood waiting. "Ruth," said the Harvester, "this is a man who has been making quite a search for you, and at last he has you located." The Harvester went to the girl's side and put a reinforcing arm around her. "Perhaps he brings you some news that will make life most interesting and very lovely for you. Will you shake hands with Mr. Kennedy?" The girl suddenly straightened to unusual height. "I will hear why he has been making quite a search for me, and on whose authority he has me located first," she said. A diabolical grin crossed the face of the Harvester, and he took heart. "Then please be seated, Mr. Kennedy," he said, "and we will talk over the matter. As I understand, you are a representative of my wife's people." The girl stared at the Harvester. "Take your chair, Ruth, and meet this as a matter of course," he advised casually. "You always have known that some day it must come. You couldn't look in the face of those photographs of your mother in her youth and not realize that somewhere hearts were aching and breaking, and brains were busy in a search for her." The girl stood rigid. "I want it distinctly understood," she said, "that I have no use on earth for my mother's people. They come too late. I absolutely refuse to see or to hold any communication with them." "But, young lady, that is very arbitrary," cried Mr. Kennedy. "You don't understand. They are a couple of old people, and they are slowly dying of broken hearts." "Not so badly broken, or they wouldn't die slowly," commented the girl grimly. "The heart that was really broken was my mother's. The torture of a starved, overworked body and hopeless brain was hers. There was nothing slow about her death, for she went out with only half a life spent, and much of that in acute agony because of their negligence. David, you often have said that this is my home. I choose to take you at your word. Will you kindly tell this man that he is not welcome in this house, and I wish him to leave it at once?" The Harvester stepped back, and his face grew very white. "I can't, Ruth," he said gently. "Why not?" "Because I brought him here." "You brought him here? You? David, are you crazy? You!" "It is through me that he came." The girl caught the mantel for support. "Then I stand alone again," she said. "Harvester, I had thought you were on my side." "I am at your feet," said the man in a broken voice. "Ruth, dear, will you let me explain?" "There is only one explanation, and with what you have done for me fresh in my mind, I can't put it into words." "Ruth, hear me." "I must. You force me. But before you speak, understand this. Not now, or through all eternity, do I forgive the inexcusable neglect that drove my mother to what I witnessed and was helpless to avert." My dear," said the Harvester, "I had hoped the woods had done a more perfect work in your heart. Your mother is lying in state now, girl, safe from further suffering of any kind, and if I read aright, her tired face and shriveled frame were eloquent of forgiveness. Ruth, dear, if she so loved them that her heart was broken and she died for them, think what they are suffering. Have some mercy on them." "Get this very clear, David," said the girl. "She died of hunger for food. Her heart was not so broken that she couldn't have lived a lifetime and got much comfort out of it if her body had not lacked sustenance. Oh, I was so happy a minute ago. David, why did you do this thing?" The Harvester picked up the girl, placed her in a chair, and knelt beside her with his arms around her. "Because of the pain in the world, Ruth," he said simply. "Your mother is sleeping sweetly in the long sleep that knows neither anger nor resentment, And so I was forced to think of a gentle-faced little old mother whose heart is daily one long ache, whose eyes are dim with tears, and a proud, broken old man who spends his time trying to comfort her when his life is as desolate as hers. How do you know so wonderfully much about their aches and broken hearts? Because I have seen their faces when they were happy, Ruth, and so I know what suffering would do to them. There were pictures of them and letters in the bottom of that old trunk. I searched it the other night and found them. And by what life has done to your mother and to you, I can judge what it is now bringing them. Never can you be truly happy, Ruth, until you have forgiven them and done what you can to comfort the remainder of their lives. I did it because of the pain in the world, my girl. What about my pain? The only way on earth to cure it is through forgiveness. That and that only will ease it all away and leave you happy and free for life and love. So long as you let this rancor eat in your heart, Ruth, you are not and never can be normal. You must forgive them, dear. Hear what they have to say and give them the comfort of seeing what they can discover of her in you. Then your heart will be at rest at last, your soul free. You can take your rightful place in life, and the love you crave will awaken in your heart. Ruth, dear, you are the acme of gentleness and justice. Be just and gentle now. Give them their chance. My heart aches and always will ache for the pain you have known, but nursing and brooding over it will not cure it. It is going to take a heroic operation to cut it out, and I chose to be the surgeon. You have said that I once saved your body from pain, Ruth. Trust me now to free your soul. What do you want? I want you to speak kindly to this man who through my act has come here, and allow him to tell you why he came. Then I want you to do the kind and womanly thing your duty suggests that you should. David, I don't understand you. That is no difference, said the Harvester. The point is, do you trust me? The girl hesitated. Of course I do, she said at last. Then hear what your grandfather's friend has come to say for him, and forget yourself in doing to others as you would have them. Really, Ruth, that is all of religion, or of life worthwhile. Go on, Mr. Kennedy. The Harvester drew up a chair, seated himself beside the girl, and taking one of her hands, he held it closely and waited. I was sent here by my law partner and my closest friend, Mr. Alexander Heron of Philadelphia, said the stranger. Both he and Mrs. Heron were bitterly opposed to your mother's marriage because they knew life and human nature, and there never is but one end to men such as she married. You may omit that, said the girl coldly. Simply state why you are here. In response to an inquiry from your husband concerning the originals of some photographs he sent to a detective agency in New York, they have had the case for years, and recognizing the pictures as a clue, they telegraphed Mr. Heron. The prospect of news after years of fruitless searching so prostrated Mrs. Heron that he dared not leave her, and he sent me. Kindly tell me this, said the girl. Where were my mother's father and mother for the 4 years immediately following her marriage? They went to Europe to avoid the humiliation of meeting their friends. There in Italy, Mrs. Heron developed a fever, and it was several years before she could be brought home. She retired from society, and has been confined to her room ever since. When they could return, a search was instituted at once for their daughter, but they never have been able to find a trace. They have hunted through every eastern city they thought might contain her, and overlooked a little insignificant place like Chicago, of course. I myself conducted a personal search there, and visited the home of every Jameson in the directory, or who had mail at the office, or of whom I could get a clue of any sort. I don't suppose 2 women in a little garret room would be in the directory, and there never was any mail. Did your mother ever appeal to her parents? She did, said the girl. She admitted that she had been wrong, asked their forgiveness, and begged to go home. That was in the 2nd year of her marriage, and she was in Cleveland. Afterward she went to Chicago, and from there she wrote again. Her father and mother were in Italy fighting for the mother's life 2 years after that. It is very easy to become lost in a large city. Criminals do it every day and are never found, even with the best detectives on their trail. I am very sorry about this. My friends will be broken-hearted. At any time they would have been more than delighted to have had their daughter return. A letter on the day following the message from the agency brought news that she was dead, and now their only hope for any small happiness at the close of years of suffering lies with you. I was sent to plead with you to return with me at once and make them a visit. Of course their home is yours. You are their only heir, and they would be very happy if you were free and would remain permanently with them. How do they know I will not be like the father they so detested? They had sufficient cause to dislike him. They have every reason to love and welcome you. They are consumed with anxiety. Will you come? No. This is for me to decide. I do not care for them or their property. Always they have failed me when my distress was unspeakable. Now there is only one thing I ask of life, more than my husband has given me, and if that lay in his power, I would have it. You may go back and tell them that I am perfectly happy. I have everything I need. They can give me nothing I want, not even their love. Perhaps sometime I will go to see them for a few days, if David will go with me. Young woman, do you realize that you are issuing a death sentence? Asked the lawyer gently. It is a just one. I do not believe your husband agrees with you. I know I do not. Mrs. Heron is a tiny old lady with a feeble spark of vitality left, and with all her strength she is clinging to life and pleading with it to give her word of her only child before she goes out unsatisfied. She knows that her daughter is gone, and now her hopes are fastened on you. If, for only a few days, you certainly must go with me. I will not. The lawyer turned to the Harvester. She will be ready to start with you tomorrow morning on the first train north, said the Harvester. We will meet you at the station at 8. I am afraid I forgot to tell my driver to wait. You mean your instructions were not to let the girl out of your sight, said the Harvester. Very well. We have comfortable rooms. I will show you to one. Please come this way. The Harvester led the guest to the lake room and arranged for the night. Then he went to the telephone and sent a message to an address he had been furnished, asking for an immediate reply. It went to Philadelphia and contained a description of the lawyer, and asked if he had been sent by Mr. Heron to escort his granddaughter to his home. When the Harvester returned to the living room, the girl, white and defiant, waited before the fire. He knelt beside her and put his arms around her, but she repulsed him. So he sat on the rug and looked at her. No wonder you felt sure you knew what that was, she cried bitterly. Ruth, if you will allow me to lift the bottom of that old trunk, and if you will read any one of the 6 letters I read, you will forgive me and begin making preparations to go. It's a wonder you don't hold them before me and force me to read them, she said. Don't say anything you will be sorry for after you are gone, dear. I'm not going. Oh, yes, you are. Why? Because it is right that you should, and right is inexorable. Also because I very much wish you to. You will do it for me. Why do you want me to go? I have 3 strong reasons. First, as I told you, it is the only thing that will cleanse your heart of bitterness and leave it free for the tenanting of a great and holy love. Next, I think they honestly made every effort to find your mother and are now growing old in despair you can lighten, and you owe it to them and yourself to do it. Lastly, for my sake. I've tried everything I know, Ruth, and I can't make you love me or bring you to a realizing sense of it if you do. So before I saw that chest, I had planned to harvest my big crop and try with all my heart while I did it. And if love hadn't come then, I meant to get someone to stay with you, and I was going away to give you a free perspective for a time. I meant to plead that I needed a few weeks with a famous chemist I know to prepare me better for my work. My real motive was to leave you and let you see if absence could do anything for me in your heart. You've been very nearly the creature of my hands for months, my girl. Whatever anyone else may do, you're bound to miss me mightily, and I figured that with me away, perhaps you could solve the problem alone I seem to fail in helping you with. This is only a slight change of plans. You are going in my stead. I will harvest the ginseng and cure it, and then if you are not at home and the loneliness grows unbearable, I will take the chemistry course until you decide when you will come, if ever. If ever? Yes, said the Harvester. I am growing accustomed to facing big propositions. I will not dodge this. The faces of the 3 of your people I have seen prove refinement. Their clothing indicates wealth. These long, lonely years mean that they will shower you with every outpouring of loving, hungry hearts. They will keep you if they can, my dear. I do not blame them. The life I propose for you is one of work, mostly for others, and the reward, in great part, consists of the joy in the soul of the Creator of things that help in the world. I realize that you will find wealth, luxury, and lavish love. I know that I may lose you forever, and if it is right and best for you, I hope I will. I know exactly what I am risking, but yet I say, go. I don't see how you can, and love me as you prove you do. That is a little streak of the inevitableness of nature that the forest has ground into my soul. I'd rather cut off my right hand than take yours with it in the parting that will come in the morning. But you are going, and I am sending you. So long as I am shaped like a human being, it is in me to dignify the possession of a vertical spine by acting as nearly like a man as I know how. I insist that you are my wife, because it crucifies me to think otherwise. I tell you tonight, Ruth, you are not and never have been. You are free as air. You married me without any love for me in your heart, and you pretended none. It was all my doing. If I find that I was wrong, I will free you without a thought of results to me. I am a secondary proposition. I thought then that you were alone and helpless, and before the Almighty I did the best I could. But I know now that you are entitled to the love of relatives, wealth, and high social position, no doubt. If I allowed the passion in my heart to triumph over the reason of my brain, and worked on your feelings and tied you to the woods, without knowing but that you might greatly prefer that other life you do not know, but to which you are entitled, I would go out and sink myself in Loon Lake. David, I love you. I do not want to go. Please, please let me remain with you. Not if you could say that, realizing what it means, and give me the kiss right now, I would stake my soul to win. Not by any bribe you can think of or any allurement you can offer. It is right that you go to those suffering old people. It is right you know what you are refusing for me before you renounce it. It is right you take the position to which you are entitled until you understand thoroughly whether this suits you better. When you know that life as well as this, the people you will meet as intimately as me, then you can decide for all time, and I can look you in the face with honest, unwavering eye. And if by any chance your heart is in the woods, and you prefer me and the cabin to what they have to offer, to all eternity your place here is vacant, Ruth. My love is waiting for you, and if you come under those conditions, I never can have any regret. A clear conscience is worth restraining passion a few months to gain, and besides, I always have got the fact to face that when you say I love, and when I say I love, it means 2 entirely different things. When you realize that the love of man for woman and woman for man is the thing that floods the heart, brain, soul, and body with a wonderful and all-pervading ecstasy, and if I happen to be the man who makes you realize it, then come tell me, and we will show God and His holy angels what earth means by the heaven-inspired word Radiance. David, there never will be any other man like you. The exigencies of life must develop many a finer and better. You still refuse me? You yet believe I do not love you? Not with the love I ask, my girl. But if I did not believe it was germinating in your heart, and that it would come pouring over me in a torrent some glad day, I doubt if I could allow you to go, Ruth. I am like any other man in selfishness and in the passions of the body. Selfishness? You haven't an idea what it means, said the girl. And what you call love, there I haven't, but I know how to appreciate you, and you may be positively sure that it will be only a few days until I will come back to you. But I don't want you until you can bring the love I crave. I am sending you to remain until that time, Ruth. But it may be months, man. Then stay months. But it may be never. Then remain forever. That will be proof positive that your happiness does not lie in my hands. Why should I not consider you as you do me? Because I love you and you do not love me. You are cruel to yourself and to me. You talk about the pain in the world. What about the pain in my heart right now? And if I know you in the least, 1 degree more would make you cry aloud for mercy. Oh, David, are we of no consideration at all? The muscles of the harvester's face twisted an instant. This is where we lop off the small branches to grow perfect fruit later. This is where we do evil that good may result. This is where we suffer tonight in order we may appreciate fully the joy of love's dawning. If I am causing you pain, forgive me, dear heart. I would give my life to prevent it, but I am powerless. It is right. We cannot avoid doing it, if we ever would be happy. He picked up the girl and held her crushed in his arms a long time. Then he set her inside her door and said, "Lay out what you want to take and I will help you pack so that you can get some sleep. We must be ready early in the morning." When the clothing to be worn was selected, the new trunk packed and all arrangements made, the girl sat in his arms before the fire as he had held her when she was ill, and then he sent her to bed and went to the lake shore to fight it out alone. Only God and the stars and the faithful Belshazzar saw the agony of a strong man in his extremity. Near dawn he heard the tinkle of the bell and went to receive his message and order a car for morning. Then he returned to the merciful darkness of night and paced the driveway until light came peeping over the treetops. He prepared breakfast and an hour later put the girl on the train and stood watching it until the last rift of smoke curled above the spires of the city. End of chapter 19, part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Harvester by Gene Stratton-Porter. Read by Cindy Steib. Chapter 20. The Man in the Background. Then the harvester returned to Medicine Woods to fight his battle alone. At first the pain seemed unbearable, but work always had been his panacea. It was his salvation now. He went through the cabin, folding bedding and storing it in closets, rolling rugs sprinkled with powdered alum, packing cushions, and taking window seats from the light. "Our sleeping room and the kitchen will serve for us, Belle," he said. "We will put all these other things away carefully, so they will be as good as new when the girl comes home." The evening of the second day he was called to the telephone. "There is a telegram for you," said a voice. "A message from Philadelphia. It reads, 'Arrived safely. Thank you for making me come. Dear old people. Will write soon. With love, Ruth.' Have you got it?" "No," lied the harvester, grinning rapturously. "Repeat it again slowly and give me time after each sentence to write it. Now, go on." He carried the message to the back steps and sat reading it again and again. I supposed I'd have to wait at least 4 days, he said to Ajax, as the bird circled before him. This is from the girl, old man, and she is not forgetting us to begin with, anyway. She is there, all safe. She sees that they need her. They are lovable old people. She is going to write us all about it soon, and she loves us all she knows how to love anyone. That should be enough to keep us sane and sensible until her letter comes. There is no use to borrow trouble, so we will say everything in the world is right with us, and be as happy as we can on that until we find something we cannot avoid worrying over. In the meantime, we will have faith to believe that we have suffered our share, and the end will be happy for all of us. I am mighty glad the girl has a home and the right kind of people to care for her. Now when she comes back to me, I needn't feel that she was forced, whether she wanted to or not, because she had nowhere to go. This will let me out with a clean conscience, and that is the only thing on earth that allows a man to live in peace with himself. Now I'll go finish everything else, and then I'll begin the ginseng harvest. So the harvester hitched Betsy, and with Belshazzar at his feet, he drove through the woods to the sarsaparilla beds. He noticed the beautiful lobed leaves on which the rabbits had been nibbling, and the heads of lustrous purple-black berries as he began digging the roots that he sold for stimulants. I might have needed a dose of you now myself, the harvester addressed a heap of uprooted plants, if the electric wires hadn't brought me a better. Great invention, that. Never before realized it fully. I thought today would be black as night, but that message changes the complexion of affairs mightily. So I'll dig you for people who really are in need of something to brace them up. After the sarsaparilla was on the trays, he attacked the beds of Indian hemp with its long graceful pods and took his usual supply. Then he worked diligently on the warm hillside over the dandelion. When these were finished, he brought 6 young men from the city and drilled them on handling ginseng. He was warm, dirty, and tired when he came from the beds the evening of the 4th day. He finished his work at the barn, prepared and ate his supper, slipped into clean clothing, and walked to the country road where it crossed the lane. There he opened his mailbox. The letter he expected with the Philadelphia postmark was inside. He carried it to the bridge, and sitting in her favorite place, with the lake breeze threading his hair, opened his first letter from the girl. My dear friend, lover, husband, it began. The harvester turned the sheets face down across his knee, laid his hand on them, and stared meditatively at the lake. Friend, he commented. Well, that's all right. I am her friend, as well as I know how to be. Lover. I come in there full force. I did my level best on that score, though I can't boast myself a howling success. A man can't do more than he knows, and if I had been familiar with all the wiles of expert professional love-makers, they wouldn't have availed me in the girl's condition. I had a mighty peculiar case to handle in her, and not a particle of training. But if she says lover, I must have made some kind of a showing on the job. Husband. A slow flush crept up the brawny neck and tinged the bronzed face. That's a good word, said the harvester, and it must mean a wonderful thing to some men. Who bides his time? Well, I'm biding, and if my time ever comes to be my dream girl's husband, I'll wager all I'm worth on one thing. I'll study the job from every point of the compass, and I'll see what showing I can make on being the kind of a husband that a woman clings to and loves at 80. Taking a deep breath, the harvester lifted the letter, and laying one hand on Belshazzar's head, he proceeded, I might as well admit in the beginning that I cried most of the way here. Some of it was because I was nervous and dreaded the people I would meet, and more on account of what I felt toward them, but most of it was because I did not want to leave you. I have been spoiled dreadfully. You have taught me so to depend on you, and for once I feel that I really can claim to have been an apt pupil, that it was like having the heart torn out of me to come. I want you to know this, because it will teach you that I have a little bit of appreciation of how good you are to me and to all the world as well. I am glad that I almost cried myself sick over leaving you. I wish now I had just stood up in the car and roared like a burned baby. But all the tears I shed in fear of grandfather and grandmother were wasted. They are a couple of dear old people, and it would have been a crime to allow them to suffer more than they must of necessity. It all seems so different when they talk, and when I see the home, luxuries, and friends my mother had, it appears utterly incomprehensible that she dared leave them for a stranger. Probably the reason she did was because she was grandfather's daughter. He is gentle and tender most of the time, but when anything irritates him, and something does every few minutes, he breaks loose, and such another explosion you never heard. It does not mean a thing, and it seems to lower his tension enough to keep him from bursting with palpitation of the heart or something, but it is a strain for others. At first it frightened me dreadfully. Grandmother is so tiny and frail, so white in her big bed, and when he is the very worst and she only smiles at him, why, I know he does not mean it at all. But, David, I hope you never will get an idea that this would be a pleasant way for you to act, because it would not, and I never would have the courage to offer you the love I have come to find if you slammed a cane and yelled, "Damnation!" at me. Grandmother says she does not mind at all, but I wonder if she did not acquire the habit of lying in bed because it is easier to endure in a prostrate position. The house is so big I get lost, and I do not know yet which are servants and which friends, and there is a steady stream of seamstresses and milliners making things for me. Grandmother and father both think I will be quite passable in appearance when I am what they call modishly dressed. I think grandmother will forget herself some day and leave her bed before she knows it, in her eagerness to see how something appears. I could not begin to tell you about all the lovely things to wear, for every occasion under the sun, and they say these are only temporary, until some can be made especially for me. They divide the time in sections, and there is an hour to drive. I am to have a horse and ride later, and a time to shop, so long to visit grandmother, and set hours to sleep, dress, to be fitted, taken to see things, music lessons, and a dancing teacher. I think a longer day will have to be provided. I do not care anything about dancing. I know what would make me dance nicely enough for anything, but I am going to try the music and see if I can learn just a few little songs and some old melodies for evening, when the work is done, the fire burns low, and you are resting on the rug. There is enough room for a piano between your door and the south wall, and that corner seems vacant anyway. You would like it, David, I know, if I could play and sing just enough to put you to sleep nicely. It is in the back of my head that I will try to do every single thing just as they want me to, and that will make them happy. But never forget that the instant I feel in my soul that your kiss is right on my lips, I am coming to you by lightning express, and I told them so the first thing, and that I only came because you made me. They did not raise an objection, but I am not so dull that I cannot see they are trying to bind me to them from the very first, with chains too strong to break. We had just one little clash. Grandfather was mightily pleased over what you told Mr. Kennedy about my never having been your wife, and that I was really free. There seems to be a man, the son of his partner, whom grandfather dearly loves, and he wants me to be friends with his friend. One can see at once what he is planning, because he said he was going to introduce me as Miss Jameson. I told him that would be creating a false impression, because I was a married woman, but he only laughed at me and went straight to doing it. Of course I know why, but he is so terribly set I cannot stop him. So I shall have to tell people myself that I am a staid old married lady. After all, I suppose I might as well let him go if it pleases him. I shall know how to protect myself and anyone else from any mistakes concerning me. And in my heart I know what I know, and what I cannot make you believe, but I will some day. I suspect you're harvesting the ginseng now. The roar and rush of the city seems strange, as if I never had heard it before, and I feel so crowded. I scarcely can sleep at night for the clamor of the cars, cabs, and throbbing life. Grandfather will not hear a word. He just sputters and says, "Damnation," when I try to tell him about you. But Grandmother will listen, and I talk to her of you and Medicine Woods by the hour. She says she thinks you must be a wonderfully nice person. I haven't dared tell her yet the thing that will win her. She is so little and frail, and she has heart trouble so badly, but some day I shall tell her all about Chicago that I can, and then of Uncle Henry, and then about you and the oak, and that will make her love you as I do. There are so many things to do. They have sent for me 3 times. I shall tell them they must put you on the schedule and give me so much time to write, or I will upset the whole program. I think you will like to know that Mr. Kennedy told Grandfather all you said to him about my illness. For almost as soon as I came, he brought a very wonderful man to my room, and he asked many questions, and I told him all about it and what I had been doing. He made out a list of things to eat and exercises. I am being taken care of just as you did, so I will go on growing well and strong. The trouble is they are too good to me. I would just love to shuffle my feet in dead leaves and lie on the grass this morning. I never got my swim in the lake. I will have to save that until next summer. He also told Grandfather what you said about Uncle Henry, and I think he was pleased that you tried to find him as soon as you knew. He let me see the letter Uncle Henry wrote, and it was a vile thing, just such as he would write. It asked how much he would be willing to pay for information concerning his heir. I told Grandfather all about it, and I saw the answer he wrote. I told him some things to say, and one of them was that the honesty of a man without a price prevented the necessity of anything being paid to find me. The other was that you located my people yourself, and at once sent me to them against my wishes. I was determined he should know that. So Uncle Henry missed his revenge on you. He evidently thought he not only would hurt you by breaking up your home and separating us, but also he would get a reward for his work. He wrote some untrue things about you, and I wish he hadn't, for Grandfather can think of enough himself, but I will soon change that. Please, please take good care of all my things, my flowers and vines, and most of all, tell Belshazzar to protect you with his life. And you be very good to my dear, dear lover. I will write again soon. Ruth. When the Harvester had studied the letter until he could repeat it backward, he went to the cabin and answered it. Then he sent subscriptions for 2 of Philadelphia's big dailies, and harvested ginseng from dawn until black darkness. Never was such a crop grown in America. The beds had been made in the original home of the plant, so that it throve there, under perfectly natural conditions in the forest, but here and there branches had been thinned above, and nature helped by science below. This resulted in thick, pulpy roots of astonishing size and weight. As the Harvester lifted them, he bent the tops and buried part of the seed for another crop. For weeks he worked over the bed. Then the last load went down the hill to the dry house, and the helpers were paid. Next, the fall work was finished. Fuel and food were stored for winter, while the cold crept from the lake, swept down the hill, and surrounded the cabin. The Harvester finished long days in the dry house and storeroom, and after supper he sat by the fire reading over the girl's letters, carving on her candlesticks, or in the workroom, bending above the boards he was shaving and polishing for a gift he had planned for her Christmas. The Careys had him in their home for Thanksgiving. He told them all about sending the girl away himself, read them some of her letters, and they talked with perfect confidence of how soon she would come home. The Harvester tried to think confidently, but as the days went by, the letters became fewer, always with the excuse that there was no time to write, but with loving assurance that she was thinking of him and would do better soon. However, they came often enough that he had something new to tell his friends, so that they did not suspect that waiting was a trial to him. A few days after Thanksgiving, the gift that he had planned was finished. It was a big burl maple box, designed after the hope chests that he saw advertised in magazines. The wood was rare, cut in heavy slabs, polished inside and out, dovetailed corners with ornate brass bindings, hinges and lock, and hand-carved feet. On the inside of the lid, cut on a brass plate, was the inscription, Ruth Langston, Christmas of 1910, David. Then he began packing the chest. He put in the finished candlesticks and a box of candleberry dips he had made of delightfully spiced wax, colored pale green. He ordered the doll weeks before from the largest store in Onabasha, and the dealer brought on several that he might make a selection. He chose a large baby doll, almost life-size, and sent it to the dressmaking department to be completely and exquisitely clothed. Long before the day he was picking kernels to glaze from nuts, drying corn to pop, and planning candies to be made of maple sugar. When he figured it was time to start the box, he worked carefully, filling spaces with chestnut and hazel burrs, and finishing the tops of boxes with gaudy red and yellow leaves he had kept in their original brightness by packing them in sand. He put in scarlet berries of mountain ash and long twining sprays of yellow and red bittersweet berries for her room. Then he carefully covered the chest with cloth, packed it in an outside box, and sent it to the girl by express. As he came from the train shed, where he had helped with loading, he met Henry Jameson. Instantly the long arm of the Harvester shot out, and in a grip that could not be broken, he caught the man by the back of the neck and proceeded to dangle him. As he did so, he roared with laughter. "Dear Uncle Henry," he cried, "how did you feel when you got your letter from Philadelphia? Wasn't it a crime that an honest man, which same refers to me, beat you? Didn't you gnash your teeth when you learned that instead of separating me from my wife, I had found her people and sent her to them myself? Didn't it rend your soul to miss your little revenge and fail to get the good, fat reward you confidently expected? Ho, ho! Thus are lofty souls downcast. I pity you, Henry Jameson, but not so much that I won't break your back if you meddle in my affairs again, and I am taking this opportunity to tell you so. Here, you go out of my life, for if you appear in it once more, I will finish you like a copperhead. Understand?" With a last shake, the Harvester dropped him and went into the express office, where several men had watched the proceedings. "Been dipping in your affairs, has he?" asked the expressman. "Trying it," laughed the Harvester. "Well, he is just moving to Idaho, and you probably won't be bothered with him any more." "Good news," said the Harvester. He felt much relieved as he went back to Betsy and drove to Medicine Woods. The Careys had invited him, but he chose to spend Christmas alone. He had finished breakfast when the telephone bell rang, and the expressman told him there was a package for him from Philadelphia. The Harvester mounted Betsy and rode to the city at once. The package was so very small he slipped it into his pocket and went to the doctor's to say Merry Christmas. To Mrs. Carey he gave a pretty lavender silk dress, and to the doctor a new watch chain. Then he went to the hospital, where he left with Molly a set of china dishes from the girl and a fur-lined greatcoat, his gift to Dr. Harmon. He rode home and stabled Betsy, giving her an extra quart of oats, and going into the house, he sat by the kitchen fire and opened the package. In a nest of cotton lay a tissue-wrapped velvet box, and inside that, in a leather pocket case, an ivory miniature of the girl by an artist who knew how to reproduce life. It was an exquisite picture, and a face of wonderful beauty. He looked at it for a long time, and then called Belshazzar and carried it out to show Ajax. Then he put it into his breast pocket squarely over his heart, but he wore the case shiny the first day taking it out. Before noon he went to the mailbox and found a long letter from the girl, full of life, health, happiness, and with steady assurance of love for him. But there was no mention made of coming home. She seemed engrossed in the music lessons, riding, dancing, pretty clothing, splendid balls, receptions, and parties of all kinds. The Harvester answered it with his heart full of love for her, and then waited. It was a long week before the reply came, and then it was short on account of so many things that must be done. But she insisted that she was well, happy, and having a fine time. After that, the letters became less frequent and shorter. At times, there would be stretches of almost 2 weeks with not a line, and then only short notes to explain that she was too busy to write. Through the dreary cold days of January and February, the Harvester invented work in the storeroom, in the workshop, at the candlesticks, sat long over great books, and spent hours in the little laboratory preparing and compounding drugs. In the evenings he carved and read. First of all, he scanned the society columns of the papers he was taking, and almost every day he found the name of Miss Ruth Jameson, often a paragraph describing her dress and her beauty of face and charm of manner, and constantly the name of Mr. Herbert Kennedy appeared as her escort. At first the Harvester ignored this, and said to himself that he was glad she could have enjoyable times and congenial friends, and he was. But as the letters became fewer, paper paragraphs more frequent, and approaching spring worked its old insanity in the blood, gradually an ache crept into his heart again, and there were days when he could not work it out. Every letter she wrote he answered, just as warmly as he felt that he dared, but when they were so long coming and his heart was overflowing, he picked up a pen one night and wrote what he felt. He told her all about the ice-bound lake, the lonely crows in the big woods, the sapsucker's cry, and the gay cardinal's whistle. He told her about the cocoons dangling on bushes or rocking on twigs that he was cutting for her. He warned her that spring was coming, and soon she would begin to miss wonders for her pencil. Then he told her about the silent cabin, the empty rooms, and a lonely man. He begged her not to forget the kiss she had gone to find for him. He poured out his heart unrestrainedly, and then folded the letter, sealed and addressed it to her in care of the fire fairies, and pitched it into the ashes of the living-room fireplace. But expression made him feel better. There was another longer wait for the next letter, but he had written her so many in the meantime that a little heap of them had accumulated as he passed through the living room on his way to bed. He had supposed she would be gone until after Christmas, when she left, but he never had thought of harvesting sassafras and opening the sugar camp alone. In those days his face appeared weary, and white hairs came again on his temples. Carrie met him on the street and told him that he was going to the National Convention of Surgeons at New York in March, and wanted him to go along and present his new medicine for consideration. "All right," said the Harvester instantly. "I will go." He went and interviewed Mrs. Carey, and then visited the doctor's tailor and a shoe store, and bought everything required to put him in condition for traveling in good style, and for the banquet he would be asked to attend. Then he got Mrs. Carey to coach him on spoons and forks, and declared he was ready. When the doctor saw that the Harvester really would go, he sat down and wrote the president of the association, telling him in brief outline of Medicine Woods, and the man who had achieved a wonderful work there, and of the compounding of the new remedy. As he expected, return mail brought an invitation for the Harvester to address the association and describe his work and methods, and present his medicine. The doctor went out in the car over sloppy roads with that letter, and located the Harvester in the sugar camp. He explained the situation, and to his surprise found his man intensely interested. He asked many questions as to the length of time and amount of detail required in a proper paper, and the doctor told him. "But if you want to make a clean sweep, David," he said, "write your paper simply and practice until it comes easy before you speak." That night the Harvester left work long enough to get a notebook, and by the light of the campfire, and in company with the owls and coons, he wrote his outline. One division described his geographical location, another traced his ancestry and education in wood lore. One was a tribute to the mother who molded his character and ground into him stability for his work. The remainder described his methods in growing drugs drying and packing them, and the end was a presentation for their examination of the remedy that had given life where a great surgeon had conceded death. Then he began amplification. When the sugar making was over, the harvester commenced his regular spring work, but his mind was so busy over his paper that he did not have much time to realize just how badly his heart was beginning to ache. Neither did he consign so many letters to the fire fairies, for now he was writing of the best way to dry hydrastis and preserve ginseng seed. The day before time to start, he drove to Onabasha to try on his clothing and have Mrs. Carey see if he had been right in his selections. While he was gone, Granny Moreland, wearing a clean calico dress and carrying a juicy apple pie, came to the stretch of flooded marshland, and finding the path under water, followed the road, and crossing a field reached the levee and came to the bridge of Singing Water where it entered the lake. She rested a few minutes there, and then went to the cabin shining between bare branches. She opened the front door, entered, and stood staring around her. "Why, things is all tore up here," she said. "Now ain't that sensible of David to put everything away and save it nice and careful until his woman gets back? Seems as if she's good and plenty long comin'. Seems as if her folks needs her mighty bad. Or she's having a better time than the boy is or somethin'." She set the pie on the table, went through the cabin and up the hill a little distance, calling the harvester. When she passed the barn, she missed Betsy and the wagon, and then she knew he was in town. She returned to the living room and sat looking at the pie as she rested. "I'd best put you on the kitchen table," she mused. "Likely he will see you there first and eat you while you are fresh. I'd hate mortal bad for him to overlook you and let you get stale after all the care I've took with your crust and all the sugar, cinnamon, and butter that's under your lid. You're a mighty nice pie, and you ought to be et hot. Now why under the sun is all them clean letters pitched in the fireplace?" Granny knelt, and selecting one, she blew off the ashes, wiped it with her apron, and read, "To Ruth, in care of the fire fairies." "What the Sam Hill is the idiot writing his woman like that for?" cried Granny, bristling instantly. "And why is he putting pages and pages of good reading like this must have in it, in care of the fire fairies? Too much alone, I guess. He's going wrong in his head. Nobody at themselves would do such a fool trick as this. I believe I had better do something. Of course I had. These is writ to Ruth. She ort to have them. Wished I knowed how she gets her mail. I'd send her some, maybe 3. I'd send a fat and a lean and a middlin', so's that she'd have a sample of all the kinds they is. It's no way to write letters and pitch them in the ashes. It means the poor boy is honin' to say things he dasn't, and so he's writing them out and never sending them at all. What's the little huzzy gone so long for, anyway? I'll fix her." Granny selected 3 letters, blew away the ashes, and tucked the envelopes inside her dress. "If I only knowed how to get at her," she muttered. She stared at the pie. "I guess you got to go back," she said, "and be et by me. Like as not I'll stall myself, for I got one already. But if David has got these fool things counted and misses any, and then finds that pie here, he'll suspicion me. Yes, I got to take you back, and hurry my stumps at that." Granny arose with the pie, cast a lingering and covetous glance at the fireplace, stooped and took another letter, and then started down the drive. Just as she reached the bridge, she looked ahead and saw the harvester coming up the levee. Instantly she shot the pie over the railing, and with a groan watched it strike the water and disappear. "Lord of love!" she gasped, sinking to the seat. "That was one of grandmother's willer plates that I promised Ruth. 'Tain't likely I'll ever see hide nor hair of it again. But they want no place to put it, and I dasn't let him know I've been up to the cabin. Maybe I can fetch a boy some day and hire him to dive for it. How long can a plate be in water and not get spiled anyway? Now what'll I do?
My head's all in a whirl. I'll bet my bosom is a-sticking out with his letters till he'll notice and take them from me."
She gripped her hands across her chest and sat staring at the Harvester as he stopped on the bridge. And seeing her attitude and distressed face, he sprang from the wagon. "Why, Granny, are you sick?" he cried anxiously.
"Yes,"
gasped Granny Moreland.
"Yes, David, I am. I'm a miserable woman. I never was in such a shape in all my days."
"Let me help you to the cabin, and I'll see what I can do for you," offered the Harvester.
"No, this is just out of your reach," said the old lady. I want to see Dr. Carey bad."
"Are you strong enough to ride in, or shall I bring him?"
I can go as well as not, David, if you'll take me."
"Let me run Betsy to the barn and get the girl's phaeton. The wagon is too rough for you. Are the pains in your chest dreadful?"
"I don't know how to describe them," said Granny with perfect truth.
The Harvester leaped into the wagon and caught up the lines. As he disappeared around the curve of the driveway, Granny snatched the letters from her dress front and thrust them deep into one of her stockings.
"Now, drat you," she cried, "stick out all you please. Nobody will see you there."
In a few minutes the Harvester helped her into the carriage and drove rapidly toward the city.
"You needn't strain your critter," said Granny. "It's not so bad as that, David."
"Is your chest any better?"
"A sight better," said Granny. "Shaking up a little 'pears to do me good."
"You never should have tried to walk. Suppose I hadn't been here, and you came the long way too. I'll have a telephone run to your house so you can call me after this." Granny sat very straight suddenly.
"My, wouldn't that get away with some of my foxy neighbors?" she said. "Me to have a phone like they do, and be conversin' at all hours of the day with my son's folks and everybody? I'd be tickled to pieces, David."
"Then I'll never dare do it," said the Harvester, "because I can't keep house without you."
"Where's your own woman?"
promptly inquired Granny. "She can't leave her people. Her grandmother is sick."
"Grandmother your foot!" cried the old woman. "I've been hearing that song and dance from the neighbors, but you got to fool younger people than me on it, David. When did any grandmother ever part a pair of youngsters just married, for months at a clip? I'd like to cast my eyes on that grandmother. She's a new breed. I was as good a mother as 'twas in my skin to be, and I'd like to see a child of mine do it for me. And as for my grandchildren, it hustles some of them to recognize me passin' on the big road, 'specially if it's Peter's girl with a town beau."
The Harvester laughed. The old lady leaned toward him with a mist in her eyes and a quaver in her voice, and asked softly,
"Got ary friend that could help you, David?"
The man looked straight ahead in silence.
"Bamfoozle all the rest of them as much as you please, lad, but I stand to you in the place of your ma. And so I asked you plainly, got ary friend that could help?"
"I can think of no way in which any one possibly could help me, dear," said the Harvester gently. "It is a matter I can't explain, but I know of nothing that any one could do."
"You mean you're tight-mouthed. You could tell me, just like you would your ma, if she was up and comin', but you can't quite put me in her place and spit it out plain. Now maybe I can help you. Is it her fault or yourn?"
Mine entirely."
What a fool question. I might 'a' knowed it. I never saw a lovinger, sweeter girl in these parts. I just worship the ground she treads on. And you, lad, you hain't had a heart in your body since first you saw her face. If I had the strength, I'd haul you out of this carriage and I'd hammer you meller, David Langston. What in the name of sense have you gone and done to the purty lovin' child?"
The Harvester's face flushed, but a line around his mouth whitened.
"Loosen up," commanded Granny. "I got some rights in this case that maybe you don't remember. You asked me to help you get ready for her, and I done what you wanted. You invited me to visit her, and I just loved her sweet, purty ways. You wanted me to shut up my house, and come over for weeks to help take care of her, and I done it gladly, for her pain and your sufferin' cut me as if 'twas my livin' flesh and blood. So you can't shut me out now. I'm in with you and her to the end. What a blameful thing have you gone and done, to drive away for months a girl that fair worshipped you."
"That's exactly the trouble, Granny," said the Harvester. "She didn't. She merely respected and was grateful to me, and she loved me as a friend, but I never was any nearer her husband than I am yours."
"I've always knowed there was a screw loose somewhere," commented Granny. "And so you've sent her off to her worldly folks in a big wicked city to get weaned away from you complete."
"I sent her to let her see if absence would teach her anything. I had months with her here, and I lay awake at nights thinking up new plans to win her. I worked for her love as I never worked for bread, but I couldn't make it, so I let her go to see if separation would teach her anything."
"Mercy me! Why, you crazy critter! The child did love you. She loved you 'nough and plenty. She loved you faithful and true. You was just the light of her eyes. I don't see how a girl could think more of a man. What in the name of sense were you expectin' months of separation to teach her but to forget you and maybe turn her to someone else?"
"I hoped it would teach her what I call love means," explained the Harvester.
"Why, you dreaded popinjay, if ever in all my born days I wanted to take a man and just literally mop up the earth with him, it's right here and now. Absence teach her what you call love. Idiot, that's your job."
"But Granny, I couldn't."
"Wouldn't, you mean, no doubt. I hain't no manner of a notion in my head, but that child, dependin' on you and grateful as she was, and tender and loving, and all such as that, I hain't a doubt but she come to you plain and told you she loved you with all her heart. What more could you ask?"
"That she understand what love means before I can accept what she offers."
"You puddin'-head, you blunderbuss," cried Granny. "Understand what you mean by love? If you're goin' to bar a woman from bein' a wife till she knows what you mean by love, you'll stop about 9/10 of the weddings in the world, and t'other 10th will be women that no decent-minded man would jine with."
"Granny, are you sure?"
"Well, livin' through it, and up'ard of 70 years with other women ort to teach me somethin'. The girl offered you all any man needs to ask or get. Her foundations was laid in faith and trust. Her affections was caught by every lovin', tender, thoughtful thing you did for her, and everybody knows you did a plenty, David. I never see such a master hand at courtin' as you be. You had her lovin' you all any good woman knows how to love a man. All you needed to 'a' done was to take her in your arms and make her your wife, and she'd 'a' waked up to what you meant by love."
"But suppose she never awakened?"
"Ah, bosh! Suppose water won't wet. Suppose fire won't burn. Suppose the sun won't shine. That's the law of nature, man. If you think I hain't got no sense at all, I just dare you to ask Dr. Carey. 'Twouldn't take him long to comb the kinks out of you."
"I don't think you have left any, Granny," said the Harvester. "I see what you mean, and in all probability you are right, but I can't send for the girl."
"Name of goodness, why?"
"Because I sent her away against her will, and now she is remaining so long that there is every probability she prefers the life she is living and the friends she has made there, to Medicine Woods and to me. The only thing I can do now is to await her decision."
"Oh, good Lord!" groaned Granny. "You make me sick enough to kill. Touch up your nag and hustle me to Doc. You can't get me there quick enough to suit me."
At the hospital she faced Dr. Carey.
"I think likely some of my innards has got to be cut out and mended," she said. "I'll just take a few minutes of your time to examination me and see what you can do."
In the private office she held the letters toward the doctor.
"They hain't no manner of sickness ailin' me, Doc. The boy out there is in deep water, and I knowed how much you thought of him, and I hoped you'd give me a lift. I went over to his place this mornin' to take him a pie, and I found his settin' room fireplace heapin' with letters he'd writ to Ruth about things his heart was just so bustin' full of it eased him to write them down. And then he hadn't the horse sense and trust in her judgment to send them on to her. I picked 2 fats, a lean, and a middlin' for samples, and I thought I'd send them some way, and I struck for home with them, and he catched me plumb on the bridge. I had to throw my pie overboard, willer plate and all, and as God is my witness, I was so flustered the boy had good reason to think I was sick a-plenty. And soon as he noticed it, I thought of you spang off, and I knowed you'd know her whereabouts, and I made him fetch me to you. On the way, I just dragged it from him that he'd sent her away his full self, because she didn't sense what he meant by love, and she wasn't beholden to him same degree and manner he was to her. Great day, Doc. Did you ever hear a piece of foolishness to come up with that? I told him to ask you. I told him you'd tell him that no clean, sweet-minded girl ever had known nor ever would know what love means to a man till he marries her and teaches her. Ain't it so, Doc?
It certainly is.
Then will you grind it into him, clean to the marrer? And will you send these letters on to Ruthie?
Most certainly I will,
said the doctor emphatically. Granny opened the door and walked out.
I'm so relieved, David, she said. He thinks they won't be no manner o' need to knife me. Likely he can fix up a few pills and send them out by mail, so's that I'll be as good as new again. Now we must get right out of here and not take valuable time. What do I owe you, Doc?
Not a cent,
said Dr. Carey.
Thank you very much for coming to see me. You'll soon be all right again.
I was some worried. Much obliged, I am sure. Come on.
1 minute, said the doctor. David, I am making up a list of friends to whom I am going to send programs of the medical meeting. I thought your wife might like to see you among the speakers and your subject. What is her address?
A slow red flushed the harvester's cheeks. He opened his lips and hesitated. At last he said, I think perhaps her people prefer that she receive mail under her maiden name while with them. Miss Ruth Jameson, care of Alexander Heron, 5770 Chestnut Street, Philadelphia, will reach her. The doctor wrote the address as if it were the most usual thing in the world, and asked the harvester if he was ready to make the trip east.
I think we had best start tonight, he said. We want a day to grow accustomed to our clothes and new surroundings before we run up squarely against serious business.
I will be ready, promised the harvester. He took Granny home, set his house in order, installed the man he was leaving in charge, touched a match to the heap in the fireplace, and donning the new traveling suit, he went to Dr. Carey's. Mrs. Carey added a few touches, warned him to remember about the forks and spoons, and not to forget to shave often, and saw them off. At the station, Carey said to him,
You know, David, we can change at Wayne and go through Buffalo, or we can take the Pittsburgh and go and come through Philadelphia.
I am contemplating a trip to Philadelphia, said the harvester, but I believe I will not be ready for, say, a month yet. I have a theory, and it dies hard. If it does not work out the coming month, I will go, perhaps, but not now. Let us see how many kinds of a fool I make of myself in New York before I attempt the Quakers. Almost to the city, the doctor smiled at the harvester.
David, where did you get your infernal assurance? He asked.
In the woods, answered the harvester placidly, in doing clean work, with my fingers in the muck, and life literally teeming and boiling in sound and action, around, above, and beneath me. A right estimate of my place and province in life comes naturally, in daily handling stores on which humanity depends. I go even deeper than you surgeons and physicians. You are powerless unless I reinforce your work with drugs on which you can rely. I do clean, honest work. I know its proper place and value to the world.
That is why I called what I have to say the man in the background. There is no reason why I should shiver and shrink at meeting and explaining my work to my fellows. Every man has his vocation, and some of you in the limelight would cut a sorry figure if the man in the background should fail you at the critical moment. Don't worry about me, Doc. I am all serene. You won't find I possess either nerves or fear. Be sure you are right, and then go ahead, is my law. Well, I'll be confounded, said the doctor. In a large hall, peopled with thousands of medical men, the name of the harvester was called the following day, and his subject was announced. He arose in his place and began to talk. "Take the platform!" came in a roar from 100 throats. The harvester hesitated. "You must, David," whispered Carrie. The harvester made his way forward and was guided through a side door, and a second later calmly walked down the big stage to the front and stood at ease, looking over his audience, as if to gauge its size and the pitch to which he should raise his voice. His lean frame loomed every inch of his 6 feet. His broad shoulders were square, his clean-shaven face alert and afire. He wore a spring suit of light gray of good quality and cut, and he was perfect as to details. "This scarcely seems compatible with my subject," he remarked casually. "I certainly appear very much in the foreground just at present, but perhaps that is quite as well. It may be time that I assert myself. I doubt if there is a man among you who has not handled my products more or less. You may enjoy learning where and how they are prepared, and understanding the manner in which my work merges with yours. I think perhaps the first thing is to paint you as good a word picture as I can of my geographical location." Then the harvester named latitude and longitude and degrees of temperature. He described the lake, the marsh, the wooded hill, the swale, the open sunny fields. He spoke of water, soil, shade, and geographical conditions. "Here I was born," he said, "on land owned by my father and grandfather before me, and previous to them by the Indians. My male ancestors, so far as I can trace them, were men of the woods, hunters, trappers, herb gatherers. My mother was from the country, educated for a teacher. She had the most inexorable willpower of any woman I ever have known. From my father I inherited my love for muck on my boots, resin in my nostrils, the long trail, the campfire, forest sounds and silences in my soul. From my mother I learned to read good books, to study subjects that puzzled me, to tell the truth, to keep my soul and body clean, and to pursue with courage the thing to which I set my hand. There was not money enough to educate me as she would. Together we learned to find it in the forest. In early days we sold ferns and wildflowers to city people, harvested the sap of the maples in spring and the nut crop of the fall. Later, as we wanted more, we trapped for skins and collected herbs for the drug stores. This opened to me a field I was peculiarly fitted to enter. I knew woodcraft instinctively. I had the location of every herb, root, bark, and seed that will endure my climate. I had the determination to stick to my job, the right books to assist me, and my mother's invincible willpower to uphold me where I wavered. As I look into your faces, men, I am struck with the astounding thought that some woman bore the cold sweat and pain of labor to give life to each of you. I hope few of you prolonged that agony as I did. It was in the heart of my mother to make me physically clean, and to that end she sent me daily into the lake, so long as it was not ice-covered, and put me at exercises intended to bring full strength to every sinew and fiber of my body. It was in her heart to make me morally clean, so she took me to nature and drilled me in its forces and its methods of reproducing life according to the law. Her work was good, to a point that all men will recognize. From there on, for a few years, she held me, not because I was man enough to stand, but because she was woman enough to support me. Without her, no doubt I would have broken the oath I took. With her, I won the victory and reached years of manhood and self-control, as she would have had me. The struggle wore her out at half a lifetime, but as a tribute to her memory,
I cannot face a body of men having your opportunities without telling you that what was possible to her and to me is possible to all mothers and men. If she is above and hears me, perhaps it will recompense some of her shortened years if she knows I am pleading with you, as men having the greatest influence of any living, to tell and to teach the young that a clean life is possible to them. The next time any of you are called upon to address a body of men, tell them to learn for themselves and to teach their sons and to hold them at the critical hour, even by sweat and blood, to a clean life. For in this way only can feeble-minded homes, almshouses, and the scarlet woman be abolished. In this way only can men arise to full physical and mental force and become the fathers of a race to whom the struggle for clean manhood will not be the battle it is with us. By the distorted faces, by the misshapen bodies, by marks of degeneracy, recognizable to your practiced eyes everywhere on the streets, by the agony of the mother who bore you and later wept over you, I conjure you, men, to live up to your high and holy privilege and tell all men that they can be clean if they will. This in memory of the mother who shortened her days to make me a moral man. And if any among you is the craven to plead immorality as a safeguard to health, I ask, what about the health of the woman you sacrifice to shield your precious bodies? And I offer my own as the best possible refutation of that cowardly lie. I never have been ill a moment in all my life, and strength never has failed me for work to which I set my hand. The rapidly decreasing supply of drugs and the adulterated importations early taught me that the day was coming when it would be an absolute necessity to raise our home supplies. So, while yet in my teens, I began collecting from the fields and woods for miles around such medicinal stuff as grew in my father's fields, marsh, and woods, and planting more wherever I found anything growing naturally in its prime. I merely enlarged nature's beds and preserved their natural condition. As the plants spread and the harvest increased, I built a dry house on scientific principles, a large storeroom, and later a laboratory in which I have been learning to prepare some of my crude material for the market, combining ideas of my own in remedies, and at last producing one your president just has indicated that I come to submit to you as a final resort in certain conditions. My operations now have spread to close 600 acres of almost solid medicinal growth, including a little lake around the shores of which flourish a quadruple setting of water-loving herbs. Occasionally he shifted his position or easily walked across the platform and faced his audience from a different direction. His voice was strong, deep, and rang clearly and earnestly. His audience sat on the front edge of their chairs and listened to something new with mouths half agape. A few times Carey turned from the speaker to face the audience. He agonized in his heart that it was a closed session and that his wife was not there to hear, and that the girl was missing it. By the bent backs and flying fingers of the reporters at their table in front, he could see that tomorrow the world would read the harvester's speech. And if it were true that the little mother had shortened her days to produce him, she had done earth a service for which many generations would call her blessed. For the doctor could look ahead, and he knew that this man would not escape. The call for him and his unimpeachable truth would come from everywhere, and his utterances would carry as far as newspapers and magazines were circulated. The good he would do would be past estimation. The harvester continued. He was describing the most delicate and difficult of herbs to secure. He was telling how they could be raised, prepared, kept, and compounded. He was discussing diseases that did not readily yield to treatment, pointing out what drugs were customarily employed, and offering, if any of them had such cases and would send to him, to forward samples of unadulterated stuff sufficient for a test comparison with what they were using. He was walking serenely and surely into the heart of every man before him. Just at the point where it was the psychological time to close, he stopped and stood a long instant facing them. Then he asked softly, Did any man among you ever see the woman to whom he had given a strong man's first passion of love slowly dying before him? One breathless instant he waited and then continued. Gentlemen, I recently saw this in my own case. For days it was coming, so at night I shut myself in my laboratory, and from the very essence of the purest of my self-compounded drugs, I distilled a stimulant, into which I put a touch of heart remedy, a brace for weakening nerves, a vitalization of sluggish blood. As I worked, I thought in that thought which embodied the essence of prayer, and when my day and my hour came, and a man who has been the president of your honorable body and is known to all of you said it was death, I took this combination that I now present to you, and with the help of the Almighty and a woman above the price of rubies, I kept breath in the girl I love, and today she is at the full tide of womanhood. As a thank offering, the formula is yours. Test it as you will. Use it if you find it good. Gentlemen, I thank you. Carey sank in his chair and watched the Harvester cross the stage. As he disappeared, the tumult began, and it lasted until the president arose and brought him back to make another bow, and then they rioted until they wore themselves out. In an immaculate dress suit, the Harvester sat that night on the right of the gray-haired president and responded to the toast, "The Harvester of the Woods." Then the reporters carried him away to be photographed and to show him the gay sights of New York. In the train the next day, steadily speeding west, he said to Dr. Carey, "I feel as the old woman of Mother Goose who said, 'Lauk a mercy on us, can this be really I?'" "You just bet it is," cried the doctor, "and you have cut out work for you in good shape." "What do you mean?" "I mean that this is a beginning. You will be called upon to speak again and again." "The point is, do you honestly think I helped any?" "You did inestimable good. It only can help men to hear plain truth that is personal experience. As for that dope of yours, it will come nearer raising the dead than anything I ever saw. Next case I see slipping, after I've done my best, I'm going to try it out for myself." "All right. Phone me and I'll bring some fresh and help you." At Buffalo, the doctor left the car and bought a paper. As he had expected, the portrait and speech of the Harvester were featured. The reporters had been gracious. They had done all that was just to a great event, and allowed themselves some latitude. He immediately mailed the paper to the girl, and at Cleveland bought another for himself. When he showed it to the Harvester, as he glanced at it, he observed, "Do I appear like that?" Then he went on talking with a man he had met who interested him. End of chapter 20. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Harvester by Gene Stratton-Porter. Read by Cindy Steib. Chapter 21. The Coming of the Bluebird. The Harvester stopped at the mailbox on his way home, and among the mass of matter it contained was something from the girl. It was a scrap as long as his least finger and 3 times as wide, and by the postmark it had lain 4 days in the box. On opening it, he found only her card, with a line written across it. But the man went up the hill and into the cabin as if a cyclone were driving him, for he read, "Has your bluebird come?" He threw his traveling bag on the floor, ran to the telephone, and called the station. "Take this message," he said. "Mrs. David Langston, care of Alexander Heron, 5770 Chestnut Street, Philadelphia. Found note after 4 days' absence. Bluebird long past due. The fairies have told it that my fate hereafter lies in your hands. As always, David." The Harvester turned from the instrument and bent to embrace Belshazzar, leaping in ecstasy beside him. "Understand that, Belle?" he asked. "I don't know, but it means something. Maybe it doesn't.
Not a thing. And again, there is a chance, only the merest possibility, that it does. We'll risk it, Belle. And to begin on, I have nailed it as hard as I knew how. Next, we will clean the house until it shines, and then we will fill the cupboard, and if anything does happen, we won't be caught napping. Yes, boy, we will take the chance. We can't be any worse disappointed than we have been before and survived it. Come along." He picked up the bag and arranged its contents, carefully brushed and folded on his shelves and in his closet. Then he removed the traveling suit, donned the old brown clothes, and went to the barn to see that his creatures had been cared for properly. Early the next morning he awoke, and after feeding and breakfasting, instead of going to harvest spice brush and alder, he stretched a line and hung the bedding from room after room to air and sun. He swept, dusted, and washed windows, made beds, and lastly polished the floors throughout the cabin. He set everything in order, and as a finishing touch, filled vases, pitchers, and bowls with the bloom of redbud and silky willow catkins. He searched the south bank, but there was not a violet, even in the most exposed places. By night he was tired, and a little of the keen edge of his ardor was dulled. The next day he worked scrubbing the porches, straightening the lawn and hedges, even sweeping the driveway to the bridge clear of wind-whirled leaves and straw. He scouted around the dry house and laboratory, and spent several extra hours on the barn, so that when evening came everything was in perfect order. Then he dressed, ate his supper, and drove to the city. He stopped at the mailbox, but there was nothing from the girl. The harvester did not know whether he was sorry or glad. A letter might have said the same thing. Nothing meant a delightful possibility, and between the two he preferred the latter. He whistled and sang as he drove to Onabasha, and Belshazzar looked at him with mystified eyes, for this was not the master he had known of late. He did not recognize the dress or the manner, but his dog heart was sympathetic to the man's every mood, and he remembered times when a drive down the levee always had been like this. For tonight the harvester's tongue was loosened, and he talked in the old way. "Just 4 words, Belle," he said, "and as I remarked before, they may mean the most wonderful thing on earth, and possibly nothing at all. But it is in the heart of man to hope, Belle, and so we are going to live royally for a week or 2, just on hope, old boy. If anything should happen, we are ready, rooms shining, beds fresh, fireplaces filled, and waiting a match, ice chest cool, and when we get back it will be stored. Also a secret, Belle, we are going to a florist and a fruit store. While we are at it, we will do the thing right, but we will stay away from Doc until we are sure of something. He means well, but we don't like to be pitied, do we, Belle? Our friends don't manage their eyes and voices very well these days. Never mind, our time will come yet. The bluebird will not fail us, but never before has it been so late." On his return he filled the pantry shelves with packages, stored the ice chest, and set a basket of delicious fruit on the dining table. 2 boxes remained. He opened the larger one and took from it an armload of white lilies that he carried up the hill and divided between the mounds under the oak. Then he uncovered his head, and standing at the foot of them, he looked among the boughs of the big tree and listened intently. After a time a soft, warm wind, catkin-scented, crept from the lake and began a murmur among the clusters of brown leaves clinging to the branches. "Mother," said the harvester, "were you with me? Did I do it right? Did I tell them what you would have had me say for the boys? Are you glad now you held me to the narrow way? Do you want me to go before men if I am asked, as Doc says I will be, and tell them that the only way to abolish pain is for them to begin at the foundation by living clean lives? I don't know if I did any good, but they listened to me. Anyway, I did the best I knew. But that isn't strange. You ground it into me to do that every day, until it is almost an instinct. Mother dear, can you tell me about the bluebird? Is that softest little rustle of all your voice, and does it say hope? I think so, and I thank you for the word."
The man's eyes dropped to earth. "And you, other mother," he said, "have you any message for me? Up where you are, can you sweep the world with understanding eyes and tell me why my bluebird does not come? Does it know that this year your child and not chance must settle my fate? Can you look across space and see if she is even thinking of me? But I know that. She had to be thinking of me when she wrote that line. Rather, can you tell me, will she come? Do you think I am man enough to be trusted with her future, if she does? One thing I promise you, if such joy ever comes to me, I will know how to meet it gently, thankfully, tenderly, please God. Good night, little women. I hope you are sleeping well." He turned and went down the hill, entered the cabin, and took from the other box a mass of Parma violets. He put these in the pink bowl and placed it on the table beside the girl's bed. He stood for a time and then began pulling single flowers from the bowl and dropping them over the pillow and snowy spread. "God, how I love her," he whispered softly. At last he went out and closed the door. He was tired and soon fell asleep with the night breeze stirring his hair, and the glamour of moonlight flooding the lake touched his face. Clearly it etched the strong manly features, the fine brow and chin, and painted in unusual tenderness the soft lines around the mouth. The little owl wavered its love story, a few frogs were piping, and the Harvester lay breathing the perfumed spring air deeply and evenly. Near midnight, Belshazzar awakened him by arising from the bedside and walking to the door. "What is it, Bel?" inquired the Harvester. The dog whined softly. The man turned his head toward the lake. A ray of red light touched the opposite embankment and came wavering across the surface. The Harvester sat up. Two big flaming eyes were creeping up the levee. "That," said the Harvester, "might be Doc coming for me to help him try out my bottled sunshine. Or it might be my bluebird." He tossed back the cover, swung his feet to the floor, setting each in a slipper beside the bed, and arose, dressing as he started for the door. As he opened the screen and stepped on the veranda, a passenger car from the city stopped, and the Harvester went down the walk to meet it. His heart turned over when he saw a woman's hand on the door. "Permit me," he said, taking the handle and bringing it back with a sweep. A tall form arose, bent forward, and descended to the step. The full flare of moonlight fell on the glowing face of the girl. "Harvester, is it you?" she asked. "Yes," gasped the man. Two hands came fluttering out, and he just had presence of mind to step in range so that they rested on his shoulders. "Has the bluebird come?" "Not yet." "Then I am not too late?" "Never too late to come to me, Ruth." "I am welcome?" "I have no words to tell you how welcome." She swayed forward, and the Harvester tried to reach her lips, but they brushed his cheek and touched his ear. "I have brought one more kiss I want to try," she whispered. The Harvester crushed her in his arms until he frightened himself for fear he had hurt her, and murmured an ecstasy of indistinct love words to her. Presently her feet touched the ground, and she drew away from him. "Harvester," she whispered, "I couldn't wait any longer. Indeed, I could not. And I couldn't leave grandfather and grandmother, and I didn't know what in the world to do, so I just brought them along. Are they welcome?" "Aside from you, I would rather have them than any people on earth," said the Harvester. There were two sounds in the car. One was an approving murmur, and the other an undeniable snort. The Harvester felt the reassuring pressure of the girl's hand. "Please, Ruth," he said, "go turn on the light so that I can see to help grandmother." A foot stamped before the front seat. "Madam Heron, if you please," cried an acrid voice. "Madam Heron," said the Harvester gently, as he set a foot on the step and reached in and bodily picked up a little old lady and started up the walk with her in his arms. "Careful there, sir," roared a voice after him. The Harvester could feel the quake of the laughing woman, and he smiled broadly as he entered the cabin and placed her in a large chair before the fire. Then he wheeled and ran back to the car, reaching it as the man was making an effort to descend. It could be seen that he had been tall, before time and sorrow had bent him, and keen eyes gleamed below shaggy white brows from under his hat brim. He had a white mustache, and his hair was snowy. "Allow me," said the Harvester, reaching a hand.
"If you touch me, I will cane you,"
said Mr. Alexander Heron. There was nothing to do but step back. The cane, wheel, and a long coat skirt interfering, the old man fell headlong, and only quick hands saved him a severe jolt and bruises. He stood glaring in the moonlight while his hat was restored. "If you run your car to the curve, you can back toward the south and turn easily," said the Harvester to the driver. As the automobile passed them, he offered his arm. "May I show you to the fire? These spring nights are chilly."
"Chilly? Demnition cold is what they are. I'm frozen to the bone. This will be the end of us both. Dragging people of our age around at this hour of night. Of all the accursed stubbornness."
"There are 3 low steps," said the Harvester. "Now a straight stretch of walk. Now 2 steps. There you are on the level. Here is an easy chair. It would be better to leave on your coat until I light the fire." He knelt and scratched a match, and almost instantly a flame sprang from the heap of dry kindling and began to wrap around the big logs. "How pretty!" exclaimed a soft voice.
"Kind of a hunting lodge in the wilds, is it?" growled a rough one. "Marcella, you will take your death here."
"I'm sure I feel no exposure. Really, Alexander, if I had passed away every time you have prophesied that I would in the past 20 years, you'd have the largest private cemetery in existence. If you would not be so pessimistic, I could quite enjoy the trip. It's so long since I've ridden in the cars."
"Of all the abandoned places! And for you to be here after your years in bed."
"But I'm not nearly so tired as I am at home, Alexander, truly." "Let me help you, Grandfather," offered the girl. She went to him and took his hat and stick.
"Leave me my cane," he cried. "Any instant that beast may attack some of us."
The girl laughed merrily. "Why, Grandfather," she chided, "Bell is the finest dog you ever knew. He is my best friend here. By the hour he has protected me, and he is gentle as a kitten. He's crazy over my coming home." She knelt on the floor, put her arms around the dog's neck, and the delighted brute quivered with the joy of her caress and the sound of her loved voice. "Ruthie," cautioned the gentle lady.
"Put that cur out of doors where animals belong," roared the old man, lifting his stick.
"Careful," warned the grave voice of the Harvester.
"I thought you said he was gentle as a kitten."
"Grandfather, I said that," cried the girl.
"Well, wasn't it the truth?"
"You can see how he loves me. Didn't I ever tell you that Bell made the first friendly overture I ever received in this part of the country? He's watched me by the day, even while I slept."
"Then what's all this infernal fuss about?"
"Try striking him if you want to find out," explained the Harvester gently. "You see, Belshazzar and I are accustomed to living here alone and very quietly. He is excited over the girl's return because she is his friend and he has not forgotten her. Then this is the first time in his life he ever heard an irritable voice from a visitor or saw a cane, and it angers him. He is perfectly safe to guard a baby if he is gently treated, but he is a sure throat hold to a stranger who bespeaks him roughly or attempts to strike. He would be of no use as a guard to valuable property while I sleep, if he were otherwise. Belle, come here. Lie still." The dog sank to the floor beside the Harvester, but his sharp eyes followed the girl, and the hair arose on his neck at every rasping note of the old man's voice.
"I wouldn't give such a creature house room for a minute," insisted the guest.
"Wait until you see him work and become acquainted with him, and you will change that verdict," prophesied the Harvester.
"I never was known to change an opinion. Never, sir, never,"
cried the testy voice. "How unfortunate," remarked the Harvester suavely.
Explain yourself, sir."
"There never has been, there never will be, a man on this earth," said the Harvester, "wholly free from mistakes. Are you warm now?" He turned to the little lady, cutting off a reply with his question. Nice and warm and quite sleepy," she said. "What may I bring you for a light lunch before you go to bed?" "Oh, could I have a bite of something?" "If only I am fortunate enough to have anything you will care for." "What about a bowl of hot milk and a slice of toast?" "Why, I think that would be just the thing." "Excuse me," said the Harvester, rising. He went to the kitchen and they could hear him moving around. "I wish the big brute would take his beast along," growled Mr. Alexander Herron. "Come, Belle," ordered the girl. "Let's go to the kitchen." The dog instantly arose and followed her. "What can I do to help?" she asked as they reached the door. "Remain where you won't dazzle my eyes," said the Harvester, "until I help the gentle lady and the gentleman to bed." Presently he came with a white cloth, 2 spoons, and a plate of bread. He spread the cloth on the table, laid the spoons on it, and opening the little cupboard, took out a long toasting fork, and sticking it into a slice of bread, he held it over the coals. When it grew golden brown, he lifted the table beside the chair and brought a bowl of scalded milk. "Marcella, that stuff will be too smoky for you. Your stomach will rebel at it." "Grandfather, there will not be a suspicion of odor," said the girl. "I have had it that way often." "Then no wonder you came from this place looking like a picked crane, if that is a sample of what you were fed on." The face of the Harvester grew redder than the heat of the fire necessitated, but at the ringing laugh of the girl he set his teeth and went on toasting bread. Grandmother crumbled some in the milk, and picking up the spoon, tested the combination. She was very hungry, and it was good. She began eating with relish. "Alexander, you will be the loser if you don't have some of this," she said. "It's just delicious." "Maybe smoked spoon victuals are proper for invalid women," he retorted, "but they are mighty thin diet for a hearty man." "What about a couple of eggs and some beef extract?" suggested the cook. "Sounds more sensible by a long shot." "Ruth, you make this toast," said the Harvester, and disappeared. Presently he placed before his guest a couple of eggs poached in milk, a steaming bowl of beef juice, and a plate of toast. For one instant the Harvester thought this was going into the fire. The next a slice was picked up and smelled testily. The girl sat on her grandfather's chair arm, and breaking a morsel of toast, dipped it into the broth and tasted it. "Oh, but this is good!" she cried. "Why haven't I some also? Am I supposed to have no tummy?" "Your turn next," said the Harvester, as he again gave her the fork and went to the kitchen. When he returned and served the girl, he found her grandfather eating heartily. "Why, I think this is fun," said the gentle lady. "I haven't had such a fine time in ages. I love the heat of the flame on my body, and things taste so good. I could go to sleep without any narcotic right now." Close her knee, the Harvester knelt on the hearth with his toasting fork. She leaned forward and ran her fingers through his hair. "You're a braw laddie," she said. "Now I see why Ruthie would come." The Harvester took the frail hand and kissed it. "Thank you," he returned. "Mush!" exploded the grizzled man in the rear. When no one wanted more food, the Harvester stacked and carried away the dishes, swept the hearth, and replaced the toaster. "Ruth and I often lunched this way last fall," he said. "We liked it for a change." "Alexander, have you noticed?" asked the little woman as she lifted wet eyes to a beautiful portrait of her daughter beside the chimney. "D'ye think I'm blind? Saw it as I entered the door. Poor taste, very. Brown may match the rug and woodwork, but it's a wretched color for a young girl in her gay time. Should be pink and white with a gold frame." "That would be beautiful," agreed the Harvester. "We must have one that way. This is not an expensive picture. It is only an enlargement from an old photograph." "We have a number of very handsome likenesses. Which one can you spare Ruth, Marcella?" "The one she likes best," said the lady promptly. "And the other is your mother, no doubt. What a girlish, beautiful face." "Wonderfully fine," growled a gruff old voice, tinctured with tears, and the Harvester began to see light.
The old man arose. "Ruthie, help your grandmother to bed," he said. "And you, sir, have the goodness to walk a few steps with me." The Harvester sprang up and brought Mr. Heron his coat and hat and held the door. The girl brushed past him. "To the oak," she whispered. They went into the night, and without a word the Harvester took his guest's arm and guided him up the hill. When they reached the 2 mounds, the moon shining between the branches touched the lily faces with holy whiteness. "She sleeps there," said the Harvester, indicating the place. Then he turned and went down the path a little distance, and waited until he feared the night air would chill the broken old man. "You can see better tomorrow," he said as he touched the shaking figure and assisted it to arise. "Your work?" Mr. Alexander Heron touched the lilies with his walking stick. The Harvester assented. "Do you mind if I carry one to Marcella?" The Harvester trembled as he stooped to select the largest and whitest, and with sudden illumination he fully understood. He helped the tottering old man to the cabin, where he sat silently before the fireplace, softly touching the lily face with his lips. "I have put grandmother in my bed, tucked her in warmly, and she says it is soft and fine," laughed the girl, coming to them. "Now you go before she falls asleep, and I hope you will rest well." She bent and kissed him. The Harvester held the door. "Can I be of any service?" he inquired. "No, I'm no helpless child." "Then to my best wishes for sound sleep the remainder of the night I will add this," said the Harvester. "You may rest in peace concerning your dear girl. I sympathize with your anxiety. Good night." Alexander Heron threw out his hands in protest. "I wouldn't mind admitting that you are a gentleman in a month or two," he said, "but it's a demnation humiliation to have it literally wrung from me tonight." He banged the door in the face of the amazed Harvester, who turned to the girl as she leaned against the mantel. He stood absorbing the glowing picture of beauty and health that she made. She had removed her traveling dress and shoes, and was draped in a fleecy white wool kimono and wearing night slippers. Her hair hung in 2 big braids, as it had during her illness. She was his sick girl again in costume, but radiant health glowed on her lovely face. The Harvester touched a match to a few candles and turned out the acetylene lights. Then he stood before her. "Now, Bluebird," he said gently, "Ruth, you always know where to find me, if you will look at your feet. I thought I loved you all in my power when you went, but absence has taught its lessons. One is that I can grow to love you more every day I live, and the other that I probably trifled with the highest gift you had to offer when I sent you away. I may have been right. Granny and Doc think I was wrong. You know the answer. You said there was another kiss for me. Ruth, is it the same or a different one?" "It is different. Quite different." "And when?" The Harvester stretched out longing arms. The girl stepped back. "I don't know," she said. "I had it when I started, but I lost it on the way." The Harvester staggered under the disappointment. "Ruth, this has gone far enough that you wouldn't play with me, merely for the sake of seeing me suffer, would you?" "No," cried the girl. "No, I mean it. I knew just what I wanted to say when I started, but we had to take grandmother out of bed. She wouldn't allow me to leave her, and I wouldn't stay away from you any longer. She fainted when we put her on the car, and grandfather went wild. He almost killed the Porters, and he raved at me. He said my mother had ruined their lives, and now I would be their death. I got so frightened I had a nervous chill, and I'm so afraid she will grow worse." "You poor child," shuddered the Harvester. "I see, I understand. What you need is quiet and a good rest." He placed her in a big easy chair, and sitting on the hearth rug he leaned against her knee and said, "Now tell me, unless you are so tired that you should go to bed." "I couldn't possibly sleep until I have told you," said the girl. "If you're merciful, cut it short," implored the Harvester. "I think it begins," she said slowly, "when I went because you sent me and I didn't want to go."
Of course, as soon as I saw Grandfather and Grandmother, heard them talk, and understood what their lives had been and what might have been, why, there was only one thing to do, as I could see it, and that was to compensate their agony the best I could. I think I have, David. I really think I have made them almost happy. But I told them all any one could tell about you in the start, and from the first, Grandmother would have been on your side. But you see how Grandfather is, and he was absolutely determined that I should live with them in their home all their lives. He thought the best way to accomplish that would be to separate me from you and marry me to the son of his partner. There are rooms packed with lovely things they bought me, David, and everything was as I wrote you. Some of the people who came were wonderful, so gracious and beautiful. I loved almost all of them. They took me places where there were pictures, plays, and lovely parties, and I studied hard to learn some music, to dance, ride, and all the things they wanted me to do, and to read good books, and to learn to meet people with graciousness to equal theirs, and all of it. Every day I grew stronger and met more people, and there were different places to go, and always when anything was to be done, up popped Mr. Herbert Kennedy and said and did exactly the right thing. And he could be extremely nice, David. I haven't a doubt, said the Harvester, laying hold of her kimono. And he popped up so much that at last I saw he was either pretending or else he really was growing very fond of me. So one day when we were alone, I told him all about you, to make him see that he must not. He laughed at me and said exactly what you did, that I didn't love you at all, that it was gratitude, that it was the affection of a child. He talked for hours about how Grandfather and Grandmother had suffered, how it was my duty to live with them and give you up, even if I cared greatly for you. But he said what I felt was not love at all. Then he tried to tell me what he thought love was, and I could see very clearly that if it was like that, I didn't love you. But I came a whole world closer to it than loving him, and I told him so. He laughed again and said I was mistaken, and that he was going to teach me what real love was, and then I could not be driven back to you. After that, everybody and everything just pushed me toward him with both hands, except one person. She was a young married woman, and I met her at the very first. She was the only real friend I ever had, and at last, the latter part of February, when things were the very worst, I told her every single thing. She was on your side. She said you were twice the man Herbert Kennedy was, and as soon as I found I could talk to her about you, I began going there and staying as long as I could, just to talk and to play with her baby. Her husband was a splendid young fellow, and I grew very fond of him. I knew she had told him, because he suddenly began talking to me in the kindest way, and everything he said seemed to be what I most wanted to hear. I got along fairly well, until hints of spring began to come, and then I would wonder about my hedge and my gold garden, and if the ice was off the lake, and about my boat and horse, and I wanted my room, and oh, David, most of all, I wanted you, just you, not because you could give me anything to compare in richness with what they could, not because this home was the best I'd ever known except theirs, not for any reason at all, only just that I wanted to see your face, hear your voice, and have you pick me up and take me in your arms when I was tired. That was when I almost quit writing. I couldn't say what I wanted to, and I wouldn't write trivial things, so I went on day after day just groping. And you killed me alive, said the Harvester. I was afraid of that, but I couldn't write. I just couldn't. It was 10 days ago that I thought of the bluebirds coming this year, and what it would mean to you, and that killed me, man. It just hurt my heart until it ached to know that you were out here alone, and that night I couldn't sleep because I was thinking of you, and it came to me that if I had your lips then, I could give you a much, much better kiss than the last. And when it was light, I wrote that line. Nearly a week later, I got your answer early in the morning, and it almost drove me wild. I took it and went for the day with May, and I told her. She took me upstairs, and we talked it over. And before I left, she made me promise that I would write you and explain how I felt and ask you what you thought. She wanted you to come there and see if you couldn't make them at least respect you. I know I was crying, and she was bathing the baby. She went to bring something she had forgotten, and she gave him to me to hold, just his little naked body. He stood on my lap and mauled my face and pulled my hair and hugged me with his stout little arms and kissed me big, soft, wet kisses, and something sprang to life in my heart that never before had been there. I just cried all over him and held him fast, and I couldn't give him up when she came back. I saw why I'd wanted a big doll all my life right then. And oh dear, the doll you sent was beautiful. But David, did you ever hold a little living child in your arms like that? I never did, said the Harvester huskily. He looked at her face and saw the tears rolling, but he could say no more, so he leaned his head against her knee, and finding one of her hands, he drew it to his lips. It is wonderful, said the girl softly. It awakens something in your heart that makes it all soft and tender, and you feel an awful responsibility, too. Grandmother had them telephone at last, and May helped me bathe my face and fix my hat. When we went to the carriage, Mr. Kennedy was there to take me home. We went past Grandmother's florist to get her some violets. David, she is sleeping under yours, with just a few touching her lips. Oh, it was lovely of you to get them. Your fairies must have told you. She has them every day, and one of the objections she made to coming here was that she couldn't do without them in winter, and she found some on her pillow the very first thing. David, you are wonderful. And Grandfather with his lily. I know where he found that. I knew instantly. Ah, there are fairies who tell you because you deserve to know. The girl bent, and slipping her arm around his neck, hugged him tight an instant, and then she continued unsteadily. While he was in the shop, Harvester, this is like your wildest dream, but it's truest truth. A boy came down the walk crying papers, and as I live, he called your name. I knew it had to be you because he said, first drug farm in America, wonderful medicine contributed to the cause of science, David Langston honored by National Medical Association. I just stood in the carriage and screamed, boy, boy, until the coachman thought I had lost my senses. He whistled and got me the paper. I was shaking, so I asked him how to find anything you wanted quickly, and he pointed the column where events are listed. And when I found the third page, there was your face, so splendidly reproduced. And you seemed so fine and noble to me, I forgot about the dress suit and the badge in your buttonhole, or to wonder when or how or why it could have happened. I just sat there shouting in my soul, David, David, medicine man, harvester man, again and again. I don't know what I said to Mr. Kennedy or how I got to my room. I scanned it by the column. At last I got to paragraphs, and finally I read all the sentences. David, I kissed that newspaper face 100 times, and if you could have had those, man, I think you would have said they were right. David, there is nothing to cry over. I'm not, said the Harvester, wiping the splashes from her hand. But Ruth, forget what I said about being brief. I didn't realize what was coming. I should have said, if you've any mercy at all, go slowly. This is the greatest thing that ever happened, or ever will happen to me. See that you don't leave out one word of it. I told you I had to tell you first, said the girl. I understand now, said the Harvester, his head against her knee while he pressed her hand to his lips. I see. Your coming couldn't be perfect without knowing this first. Go on, dear heart, and slowly. You owe me every word. When I had it all absorbed, I carried the paper to the library and said, Grandfather, such a wonderful thing has happened. A man has had a new idea, and he has done a unique work that the whole world is going to recognize. He has stood before men and made a speech that few, oh so few, could make honestly, and he has advocated right living, oh so nobly. And he has given a wonderful gift to science without price, because through it he first saved the life he loved best. Isn't that marvelous, Grandfather? And he said, Very marvelous, Ruth. Won't you sit down and read to me about it? And I said, I can't, dear Grandfather, because I have been away from Grandmother all day, and she is fretting for me, and tonight is a great ball,
and she has spent millions on my dress, I think, and there is an especial reason why I must go. And so I have to see her now, but I want to show you the man's face, and then you can read the story. You see, I knew if I started to read it he would stop me, but if I left him alone with it he would be so curious he would finish. So I turned your name under and held the paper and said, 'What do you think of that face, Grandfather? Study it carefully.' And, man, guess what he said? He said, 'I think it is the face of one of nature's noblemen.' I just kissed him time and again, and then I said, 'So it is, Grandfather, so it is. For it is the face of the man who twice saved my life, and lifted my mother from almost a pauper grave, and laid her to rest in state, and the man who found you and sent me to you when I was determined not to come.' And I just stood and kissed that paper before him, and cried again and again, 'He is one of nature's noblemen, and he is my husband, my dear, dear husband, and tomorrow I am going home to him.' Then I laid the paper on his lap and ran away. I went to Grandmother and did everything she wanted. Then I dressed for the ball. I went to say good-bye to her and show my dress, and Grandfather was there, and he followed me out and said, 'Ruth, you didn't mean it.' I said, 'Did you read the paper, Grandfather?' And he said, 'Yes.' And I said, 'Then I should think you would know I mean it, and glory in my wonderful luck. Think of a man like that, Grandfather.' I went to the ball, and I danced and had a lovely time with everyone, because I knew it was going to be the very last, and tomorrow I must start to you. On the way home I told Mr. Kennedy what paper to get and to read it. I said good-bye to him, and I really think he cared, but I was too happy to be very sorry. When I reached my room there was a packet for me, and man, like David of old, you are a wonderful poet. Oh, Harvester, why didn't you send them to me instead of the cold, hard things you wrote?" "What do you mean, Ruth?" "Those letters, those wonderful outpourings of love and passion and poetry and song and broken-heartedness." "Oh, Man, how could you write such things and throw them in the fire? Granny Moreland found them when she came to bring you a pie, and she carried them to Dr. Carey, and he sent them to me. And David, they finished me. Everything came in a heap. I would have come without them, but never, never with quite the understanding. For as I read them, the deeps opened up and the flood broke, and there did a warm tide go through all my being, like you said it would. And now, David, I know what you mean by love. I called the maids, and they packed my trunk and Grandmother's, and I had Grandfather's valet pack his, and go and secure berths and tickets and learn about trains, and I got everything ready, even to the ambulance and doctor, but I waited until morning to tell them. I knew they would not let me come alone, so I brought them along. David, what in the world are we going to do with them?" The Harvester drew a deep breath and looked at the flushed face of the girl. "With no time to mature a plan, I would say that we are going to love them, care for them, gradually teach them our work, and interest them in our plans here. And so soon as they become reconciled, we will build them such a house as they want on the hill facing us, just across Singing Water, and there they may have every luxury they can provide for themselves or we can offer, and the pleasure of your presence, and both of them can grow strong and happy. I'll have Grandmother on her feet in 10 days, and the edge off Grandfather's tongue in 3. That bluster of his is to drown tears, Ruth. I saw it tonight. And when they pass over, we will carry them up and lay them beside her under the oak, and we can take the house we build for them, if you like it better, and use this for a storeroom." "Never," said the girl, "never. My sunshine room and gold garden so long as I live. Never again will I leave them. If this cabin grows too small, we will build all over the hillside, but my room and garden, and this and the dining room and your den there, must remain as they are now." The Harvester arose and drew the davenport before the fireplace and heaped pillows. "You are so tired you're trembling, and your voice is quivering," he said. He lifted the girl and laid her down and arranged the coverlet. "Go to sleep," he ordered gently. "You have made me so wildly happy that I could run and shout like a madman."
Try to rest, and maybe the fairies who aid me will put my kiss back on your lips. I am going to the hilltop to tell Mother and my God." He knelt and gathered her in his arms a second, then called Belshazzar to guard, and went into the sweet spring night, to jubilate with that wild surge of passion that sweeps the heart of a strong man when he is most nearly primal. He climbed the hill at a rush, and standing beneath the oak on the summit, he faced the lake, and stretching his arms widely, he waved them, merely to satisfy the demand for action. When urgency for expression came upon him, he laughed a deep rumble of exultation. The night wind swept the lake and lifted his hair. The odor of spring was intoxicating in his nostrils. Small creatures of earth stirred around him. Here and there a bird, restless in the delirium of mating fever, lifted its head and piped a few notes on the moon-whitened air. The frogs sang uninterruptedly at the water's edge. The Harvester stood rejoicing. Beating on his brain came a rush of love words uttered in the girl's dear voice. "I wanted you, just you. He is my husband, my dear, dear husband. Tomorrow I am going home. Now, David, I know what you mean by love." The Harvester laughed again, and sounds around him ceased for a second, then swelled in fuller volume than before. He added his voice. "Thank God! Oh, thank God!" he cried. "And may the Author of the universe, the spirits of the little mothers who loved us, and all the good fairies who guide us, unite to bring unbounded joy to my dream girl and to guard her safely." The cocks of Medicine Woods began their second salute to dawn. At this sound, and with the mention of her name, the Harvester turned down the hill, and striding forcefully approached the cabin. As he passed the girl's room, he stepped softly, smiling as he wondered if its unexpected occupants were resting. He followed Singing Water and stood looking at the hillside, studying the exact location most suitable for a home for the old people he was so delighted to welcome. That they would remain, he never doubted. His faith in the call of the wild had been verified in the girl. It would reach them also. The hilltop would bind them. Their love for the girl would compel them. They would be company for her and a new interest in life. "Couldn't be better, not possibly," commented the delighted Harvester. He followed the path down Singing Water until he reached the bridge, where it turned into the marsh. There he paused, looking straight ahead. "Wonder if I would frighten her," he mused. "I believe I'll risk it." He walked on rapidly, vaulted the fence enclosing his land, crossed the road, and unlatched the gate. As he did so, the door opened, and Granny Moreland stood on the sill, waiting with keen eyes.
"Well, I don't need neither specs nor noonday sun to see that you're steppin' like the blue ribbon colt at the county fair, and lookin' like you owned kingdom come," she said. "What's up, David?" "You are right, dear," said the Harvester. "I have entered my kingdom. The girl has come and crowned me with her love. She had decided to return, but the letters you sent made her happier about it. I wanted you to know." Granny leaned against the casing and began to sob unrestrainedly. The Harvester supported her tenderly. "Why, don't do that, dear. Don't cry," he begged. "The girl is home for always, Granny, and I'm so happy I am out tonight trying to keep from losing my mind with joy. She will come to you tomorrow, I know." Granny tremulously dried her eyes. "What an old saphead I am," she commented. "I stole your letters from your fireplace, pitched a willer plate into the lake. You got to fish that out come day, David. Fooled you into that trip to Doc Carey to get him to mail them to Ruth, and never turned a hair. But after I got home, I commenced to thinkin'. 'Twas a pretty ticklish job to stick your nose into other people's business, and every hour it got worse, until I ain't had a fairly decent sleep since. If you hadn't come home soon, boy, I'd a been sick abed. Oh, David, are you sure she's over there and loves you to suit you now?" "Yes, dear, I am absolutely certain," said the Harvester. "She was so determined to come that she brought the invalid grandmother she couldn't leave and her grandfather. They arrived at midnight. We are all going to live together now." "Well, bless my stars! Fetched you a family. David, I do hope to all that's peaceful. I hain't put my foot in it. The moon is the deceivingest thing on earth, I know. But does her family 'pear to be an agreeable family by its light?"
The Harvester's laugh boomed a half-mile down the road. "Finest people on earth next to you, dear. I'm mighty glad to have them. I'm going to build them a house on my best location, and we are all going to be happy from now on. Go to bed. This night air may chill you. I can't sleep. I wanted you to know first, so I came over. In Mother's stead, will you kiss me and wish me happiness, dear friend?" Granny Moreland laid an eager, withered hand on each shoulder and bent to the radiant young face.
"God bless you, lad, and grant you as great happiness as life ort to fetch every clean, honest man,"
she prayed fervently, with closed eyes and her lined old face turned skyward.
"And, oh God, bless Ruth, and help her as you never helped mortal woman before, to know her own mind, without variableness, neither shadow of turnin'."
The Harvester was on Singing Water Bridge before he gave way. There he laughed as never before in his life. Finally he controlled himself and started toward the cabin, but he was chuckling as he passed the driveway and walked down the broad cement floor leading to his bathing pool, where the moonlight bridged the lake and fell as a benediction all around him. He stood a long time, when he recognized the familiar crash of a breaking backlog falling together and heard the customary leap of the frightened dog. He walked to his door and listened intently, but there was no sound, so he decided the girl had not been awakened. In the midst of a whitening sheet of gold, the Harvester dropped to his stoop and leaned his head against the broad casing. He broke a twig from a hawthorn bush beside him and sat twisting it in his fingers as he stared down the line of the gold bridge. Never had it seemed so material, so like a path that might be trodden by mortal feet and lead them straight to heaven. As on the hilltop, night again surrounded him, and the Harvester's soul drank deep, wild draughts of a new joy. Sleep was out of the question. He was too intensely alive to know that he ever again could be weary. He sat there in the moonlight, and with unbridled heart gloried in the joy that had come to him. He turned his face from the bridge as he heard the click of Belshazzar's nails on the floor of the bathing pool. Then his heart and breath stopped an instant. Beside the dog walked the girl, one hand on his head, the other holding the flowing white robe around her and grasping one of the Harvester's lilies. His first thought was sheer amazement that she was not afraid, for it was evident now that the backlog had awakened her, and she had taken the dog and gone to her mother. Then she had followed the path leading down the hill, around the cabin, and into the sheet of moonlight gilding the shore. She stood there gazing over the lake, oblivious to all things save the entrancing allurement of a perfect spring night beside undulant water. Screened from her with bushes and trees, the Harvester scarcely breathed lest he startle her. Then his head swam, and his still heart leaped wildly. She was coming toward him. On her left lay the path to the hilltop. A few steps further she could turn to the right and follow the driveway to the front of the cabin. He leaned forward, watching in an agony of suspense. Her beautiful face was transfigured with joy, aflame with love, radiant with smiles, and her tall figure fleecy white, rimmed in gold. Up the shining path of light she steadily advanced toward his door. Then the Harvester understood, and from his exultant heart burst the wordless petition, "Lord God Almighty, help me to be a man." With outstretched arms he arose to meet her. "My dream girl!" he cried hoarsely. "My dream girl!" "Coming, Harvester," she answered in tones of joy as she dropped the white flower and lifted her hands to draw his face toward her. "Is that the kiss you wanted?" she questioned. "Yes, Ruth," breathed the Harvester. "Then I am ready to be your wife," she said. "May I share all the remainder of life's joys and sorrows with you?" The Harvester gathered her in his arms and carried her to the bench on the lake shore. He wrapped the white robe around her and clasped her tenderly, as behooved a lover, yet with arms that she knew could have crushed her had they willed.
The minutes slipped away, and still he held her to his heart, the reality far surpassing his dream, for he knew that he was awake, and he realized this as the supreme hour that comes to the strong man who knows his love requited. When the first banner of red light arose above Medicine Woods and Singing Water, the cocks on the hillside announced the dawn. As the gold faded to gray, a burst of bubbling notes swelled from a branch almost over their heads, where stood a bark-enclosed little house. "Ruth, do you hear that?" asked the Harvester softly. "Yes," she answered, "and I see it. A wonderful bird with heaven's deepest blue on its back and a breast like a russet autumn leaf, came straight up the lake from the south, and before it touched the limb that song seemed to gush from its throat. And for that reason the greatest nature lover who ever lived says that it deserves preeminence. It always settles from its long voyage through the air in an ecstasy of melody. Do you know what it is, Ruth?" The girl laid a hand on his cheek and turned his eyes from the bird to her face as she answered, "Yes, Harvester man, I know. It is your first bluebird, but it is far too late, and Belshazzar has lost his high office. I have usurped both their positions. You remain in the woods and reap their harvest. You enter the laboratory and make wonderful life-giving medicines. You face the world and tell men of the high and holy life they may live if they will. And then, always and forever, you come back to Medicine Woods and to me, Harvester." The end of the book.